the July 14th meeting to order. I'd like to call the July 14th meeting to order. Mrs. Hutchinson, will you please call the roll? Here. 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 Dr. Schuler, will you lead us in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our first item is to open the public hearing on the e-learning plan. I need a motion and a second to open the public hearing. Second. So moved by Mr. Hanlon, second by Mrs. Yaboa, or Mrs. Wheaton. Mrs. Hutchinson, will you please call the roll?
Yes.
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 Yes. Yes. Okay, we do not have anyone signed up for public comments for the e-learning public hearing. Is there any comments? Board members?
So, I just have a request. Can we just explain to the public what the e-learning plan is? How it's different than remote learning last year? Right. Yeah.
So two things. One for the board, I want to remind you, please, tonight you have to speak right into the mic, so it's going to be difficult here in the back of this area. So, Mr. Polson, your question was just a clarification on this public hearing for e-learning. This is the required e-learning plan if we intend to use e-learning in lieu of the snow in an emergency day. We have to do that for the upcoming year in order to have a plan that's active. So that plan was posted last month. We've got a public hearing tonight, and the board will consider the action on the consent agenda.
Okay, so we move, since there is no public comment on the hearing for the e-learning, I need a motion and a second to close the public hearing on the e-learning plan. Moved by Mr. Hanlon. Second. Second by Mrs. Wheaton. Mrs. Hutchinson, will you call the roll?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes. Yes. Are there any modifications to the agenda?
Yeah, I'd like to propose that we move the amendment report number 1, the update on State Board of Education guidance for 2022 school year to be right after our consent agenda.
I believe we have to move the entire oral report. Am I correct in saying?
Those who move the entire oral report all three to right after consent.
Right after the consent agenda. Any questions or comments regarding that? Okay, I need is that your motion?
I move that we move the oral reports to right after consent agenda.
Moved by Mr. Paulson.
Second.
Second by Mr. Hanlon. Mrs. Hutchinson, will you call that roll?
Yes. Yes.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Can we take a quick pause? We don't like checking for this. Can we check this one, please? Can you try again?
Yes. Okay. Comments from the board president. I'm going to make a statement tonight prior to public comment. Past 36 hours, we have received a lot of emails, and for that we are grateful. because the fact that so many of you have taken time to write and come here tonight to speak is what makes our community what we call home. We know there are faces behind each one of the emails sent and the comments that will be made tonight. Those faces are of our students. There is no doubt the topic of masks triggers deep emotions, whether you are in favor of mask mandating or in favor of mask choice. Each one of us sitting around this table tonight is a parent, and with being a parent comes empathy for other parents. Some people will walk out of here tonight feeling good about the direction. Some people walk out of here tonight feeling upset or angry. The words you may hear tonight in public comment may not be the words you stand by as a person, and that does not make one person's words stronger than another person's words. It's not easy to stand before a group, especially live streamed, and speak on an emotional topic. Rather than divide further tonight, please let's listen respectfully and avoid commenting while the speaker has the floor. When Mr. Hamlin raises his hand tonight to signal your time is up, please end your comments so we can hear from as many people as we can. We have a policy on public comment that puts parameters around the allotted time for the first public comment of the night. The reason for this is that our business meeting is because of our business meeting, and the board has a lot that needs to be covered tonight so our district can operate. It has never been the practice of this board, as far as I can remember, to turn people away from public comment. We are going to be flexible, and we are going to ask that you do the same. We will increase the first public comment from 30 minutes to 45 minutes. As it states in our policy, there is a limit of 20 minutes on one topic. That may require us to skip around a bit to be sure we can get all topics covered. We also have the ability to change from 3 minutes to 2 minutes so that we can get more people in. So we're going to move it to 2 minutes. If you are here tonight and plan to share a similar message as others in this room, understand you can select a spokesperson that can recognize you by name as they speak, so you will be included in the public record as standing behind that statement. If we have significantly more speakers than the time for the first public comment, we will move the balance of the speakers to the second public comment. Okay, now I'm going to read my official before public comments start. In accordance with Board Policy 2.230, members of the public wishing to offer public comment have the opportunity to do so. A public comment sign-up sheet is made available until 7 p.m. at the meeting site, at the district meeting site. Board meetings are available for viewing via live stream on the district's YouTube channel. As with all comments, please be aware that the board, its regular practice, to not directly discuss, ask questions, or take action on public comments until the time has been taken to gather adequate information. The board is here to listen. Lack of action or direct response following public comments does not imply any lack of interest in what is being shared. Per board policy, we typically allocate 30 minutes for public comment. I've already said we are going to amend that to 45. And comments on one subject may be limited to 20 minutes. The board may shorten the time allocation for each person to less than 3 minutes. We're going to do 2, to allow the maximum number of people the opportunity to speak. To preserve confidentiality, the board and its president request that the items relating to either personnel or students be provided to the board privately or in writing for consideration in a future closed session if necessary. The board must protect the civility and decorum of the meeting. Please be respectful for the duties of the board, our district leadership team, and the democratic process in your public comments. Include your name, whether you are a district resident. Limit your comments to 2 minutes. Mr. Hamlin will time the comments and raise his hand at the 2-minute mark, and please wrap up your comments. Be factual and courteous. Do not include statements that are personally disrespectful or condescending to the board or the staff. Okay, I'm going to read 2 names. The first person is up and the second person will be up thereafter, just to make sure that we expedite it a little, get everyone that opportunity. So the first person coming to the mic is Crystal Landers, and the next person is Addison Kiffer.
here tonight to address the board on the topic of mask use in children in schools. By looking through science journals and PubMed articles on the topic, I am concerned about the long-term use of masks in the childhood community. Many research experts continue to say that children's risk of death or serious illness from COVID-19 remain extremely low, as outlined in a recent manuscript posted on July 7th and reported by the Wall Street Journal. Per the research, children continue to not be transmission drivers of the COVID-19 pandemic. Researchers across many affiliations are saying there needs to be evidence-based studies for different age groups regarding masking instead of providing a one-size-fits-all conforming policy. There has been very few child-based studies on masks. There is one randomized control study on mask use for children ages 6 to 17 recently published in JAMA Pediatrics. Yes, it's a study on elevated carbon dioxide levels observed in children's masks. And whether you read the research article and agree with the researchers' methodology or not, the authors have taken on the task of bringing evidence-based studies on masks for use for children on the table. In another study, a large database registry was taken of over 25,000 children. The average wearing time of the mask was 4.5 hours per day. Impairments caused by wearing the mask were reported by 68% of the parents. These included irritability, headaches, difficulty concentrating, less happiness, reluctance to go to school or kindergarten, malaise, impaired learning, and drowsiness or fatigue. These adverse effects are even now being coined as mask-induced exhaustion syndrome, or MIES. There is clearly a difference of opinion on this topic. However, based on the most recent guidance and studies, as a community stakeholder and parent, I propose that the district should allow for individualized choice in masking for children of all ages. Thank you.
After Addison will be Elizabeth Cesaroni. Addison?
Hi, my name is Addison Kipfer, and I'm here today because I'm angry. I'm very frustrated because I have to wear my mask when I go to school. It is not fair. I hate wearing my mask. I cannot hear my teacher, and my teacher can't hear me. I'm always, when I have to answer a question or say something in class, I have to scream. And after that, I can't breathe. And I get very, very frustrated. Oftentimes, when I'm talking to my friends, it comes up that we're pulling on our masks, or we're just totally defeating the purpose of wearing our masks because we're always pulling it in front of our faces because we can't breathe. It always comes up that we cannot breathe. And my 8-year-old sister feels the same. It is not fair that we have to wear this mask every time we go to school. I do not want to wear a mask this upcoming school year. Please unmask me.
Thank you, Addison. Elizabeth? Elizabeth will be Rob Reno.
Ms. Crabtree, may I ask that in order to hear as many people as possible speak, because I know we have a large number of people, can we please suppress the applause until the end, just again, so we can hear as many people as possible, because that takes up a lot of time.
Yes.
So that's the only reason I'm saying. I'm not trying to do anything else. I just want to hear as many people as possible.
Okay. Elizabeth?
Hello, my name is Elizabeth. I am 10 years old and I attend Sandberg Elementary School. These are some reasons why I think we should have a choice to not wear masks in school. It is very hard to understand teachers, and they have a hard time understanding us, especially when I'm in speech. It's also hard to understand your friends while they're talking when answering the teacher's questions. These masks are very uncomfortable. They get very hot. They are always falling off, and it is very hard to breathe in them. half the time the teachers and kids don't wear them properly. We always pull them down to get fresh air. Since I've been wearing these masks, I've been getting a lot of headaches and stomach aches in school. They make me feel sick. I want the choice not to wear a mask. I have no problem if some of my friends want to wear them. That is their choice. Please don't take my choice away from me. Thank you.
After Rob is Shannon Lyman.
Hi, my name is Rob Reno. I'm a homeowner in Wheaton and father of 7, so I want to thank you for your service to our community. My wife and I have been involved in ministry to kids and family and youth in Wheaton for 30 years. And you've already heard some of these studies that have indicated that mask wearing is harmful to kids. And you're probably not aware of any double-blind studies that have been done to show that mask wearing is safe for children, because those studies don't exist. Mandating masks for some students and not others will be divisive in our schools. And I know how important it is to have a unified student body. In addition, vaccinated people can be reinfected with COVID. And here is the CDC website on that. Quote, vaccine breakthrough cases are expected. No vaccines are 100% effective at preventing illness in vaccinated people. So if unvaccinated people can get COVID and vaccinated people can get COVID, how does it make any sense to mask only the unvaccinated? And please don't hear me making the case for masking everyone with that comment. But mandating masks for non-vaccinated students requires students to share personal medical information, which no one has a right to know. There are current laws on our books, as voted on by the representatives of our people in our state and in our nation, that personal medical decisions are private. These medical decisions cannot be used under any circumstances to discriminate for housing, employment, education, banking, anything. You're familiar with these HIPAA laws. So I'd argue that any school board does not have the right, the legal right, to require disclosure of private medical information, which a mask mandate will do. And without doubt, doesn't have the legal right to treat students differently based on their private medical choices. I'd expect you'd have, okay. No one here is arguing that a student can't wear a mask if they choose to, and of course they can be vaccinated if they choose to do so. I think this will be an interesting test case to see whether the district serves the parents or whether the parents serve the district. Do the parents ultimately call the shots, or does the school board ultimately call the shots? I believe parents must continue to have the final say in the education of their children and the oversight of our local. Thank you.
Next is Shannon Lyman. After Shannon is Alicia O'Connell.
Hi, my name is Shannon Lyman. I am the parent of 2 boys at Westbrook Elementary. I stand here tonight to ask for the freedom of choice. A year ago, I witnessed our district make the courageous decision to go against the norm and allow our children to go back to school in person to a varying degree, while our neighboring districts opted for remote learning for the majority of the 2020-2021 school year. While my personal experience is at the elementary school level, I feel the district did an excellent job with the restrictions they were forced to adhere to. Last week, IDPH announced they were fully adopting the updated guidance from the CDC. This was very encouraging as they laid out their plans and used phrases such as strongly encourage, should, and recommends. Identical phrases that our community is currently utilizing as our children are getting back out into the real world and going about their activities this summer without major incident. I am not here tonight to suggest to anyone that vaccinations and or masks work or don't work. But I do think everyone in this room can at least agree on one thing. We are all making the best decisions for our own families and personal situations. If you agree the vaccination works, then there should not be a risk concern. If you believe masks work, you have the choice to wear one. But we should all be entitled to make that choice for our children.
The majority of the children in this district are not at the age where they can make their own decision regarding vaccinations. To ask a child to wear a mask because their parents do not feel comfortable vaccinating them or they do not age qualify for the vaccine does not make for a comfortable school environment. No child should feel isolated or targeted by their peers. Being a teenager and a child is tough enough. And expecting a parent to vaccinate their children against their will just so their child does not feel isolated is not a solution either. Our children have been given a choice in our community for the last several months. To take this choice away from our children when it comes to attending school is wrong. Our children deserve to be in school full-time with masks and vaccines being optional. Thank you. Just please give, we all need a choice.
Alicia O'Connell, and after that is Amanda Spans.
Good evening. My name is Alicia O'Connell, and I am a parent of 5 students in District 200. This morning, Dr. Schuler and the board received an email with the signature of over 400 community members in favor of parental choice regarding masking. In addition, the board received a copy of the following letter. These words are not my own, but I am in full support of them. The original author was unable to be here tonight. As parents of District 200 schools, we inform you that in the upcoming school year, our children will not wear a face covering. Additionally, we will neither submit our children to COVID-19 testing, contact tracing, social distancing, and quarantining without a proven reason to suspect infection. We have come to this conclusion after reviewing the available data on transmission rates in children, efficacy of masks, the proven ailments of the mind and body caused by universal masking, and most importantly, logic and reason. Additionally, no legislative body has enacted a universal mask laws in school. Guidance is not legally binding. Guidance is merely guidance. The CDC has also emphasized that they provide guidance and decision-making should be made at the local level. All decisions made at the local level must be based on accurate, factual data, and any decision to layer mitigation must indicate that school children are indeed the source of transmission and infection. We are exercising our rights to choose what is best for our students. We hold no ill will toward those parents and students who decide otherwise. It is their right and it must be respected the same way our rights must be acknowledged and respected. We will in no way stand for discrimination of any student because of their vaccine status. Our children's right to a quality education can no longer be compromised.
Please wrap up.
Okay, thank you. Students have reported extreme discomfort from wearing masks for many hours, inability to understand their teachers and classmates, physiological symptoms such as headaches, overheating, dental problems, faintness, skin infections, inability to concentrate, and most importantly, isolation and despair, knowing they are healthy, but being treated as though they were sick. All these problems must be recognized as COVID-19 mitigation failure that we are no longer willing to accept. The reality is this: our children are healthy, and schools are a very insignificant source of transmission and infection. All the data is available at DuPageCountyHealth.org. Let's live in truth, because it's time to move from fear to freedom.
Amanda Span. After Amanda, ladies and gentlemen, we have 45 minutes for public comment. It's your choice on how we use that 45 minutes. Amanda Spans is next. Amy Kishler is after.
My name is Amanda Spans. I am a resident of District 200. I have 2 children. They were both removed from the district this past year and put in a private school because my children needed more education. One of the huge problems with returning them is my children are not able to receive the vaccine. Even if they were old enough, their doctors and myself, their specialists have all agreed they cannot receive the vaccine. If I return my children to Johnson Elementary School and they are forced to wear a mask, I may as well just print out their health history, write out their disabilities, and say, here, this is what I have. You all get to know because they're making me wear a mask because I can't get vaccinated. However, their doctors, myself, my husband, we all agree my children do not need masks. In fact, other than school, they have not worn a mask at all anywhere. They go to karate every day. We had a 2-week closure only last year. We had no cases. None of the kids have transmitted to each other. We had no cases in their classrooms. Why? Why force my child to wear a mask instead of letting myself and their doctors make the decision based on the individual's health needs?
Next is Amy Kipper. After that is Debbie Snyder.
Good evening, Amy Kipfer, back again. Last time I was really emotional because I got to listen to my 8-year-old express how she felt about wearing a mask. Tonight, my 12-year-old was brave enough, even though she really hates speaking in front of people, to talk to all of you and everybody watching on YouTube and this huge crowd. I want you to know that everybody wearing red tonight, some who didn't have red, represent parents' choice. We are so appreciative of our district, and we want our voices as parents to be heard by you guys and everyone else listening. I'm sorry, 1 second. So I'm standing here today to be a voice for all the students of District 200 as well. I keep hearing that kids are very adaptive to wearing masks, that they are fine wearing a mask. Here's the thing. Of course they are. They're children. They want to please us. They want to please their teacher, and they want to please their parents. I was a child of abuse for over 10 years. 10. More than 10. I adapted. I survived. Does that make it okay? Absolutely not. Now, I'm not saying wearing a mask is like being completely abused, but it is a choice of the parents to make. And that is my opinion, and it is the opinion of almost everybody here. I also wanted to talk about the Illinois Department of Health death stats that was released. In 2020, 552 kids between the age of 1 and 17 died. That was a 10% increase from 2019. But guess what? The top 3 reasons were not COVID. Do you want to know what they were? Accidents, including overdose, homicide, and suicide. I've also talked to a lot of parents who, okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
One more thing. Next up is Debbie.
One more thing. I have documents here of over 150 parents saying that they agree to parents' choice, no masking, no segregating over vaccination. I will be turning these in.
Debbie Snyder, and after Debbie is Jan Shaw.
Hello. I want you to consider all types of children and all types of different scenarios when voting on making masks optional. My son has ADHD. The inconsistency with school schedules this past year has wreaked havoc on his education. He needs routine. He needs movement. He needs time. But most importantly, he needs sufficient oxygen to his brain in order to perform well in school. All those things were taken from him last year. So if we're all expected to be responsible for each other, then how are you going to make sure you do your part in helping him and others like him succeed moving forward? When I asked my son how it makes him feel to wear a mask, his response was, "Masks make me feel like the world is ending." That's a scary feeling for a 10-year-old. Do you think he feels safe going to school, feeling that every day? Do you think he performs at his best, feeling that way? He also stated, when we go outside, we can't take our masks off because the teachers say we can't, but they can. It's just done. Even he can see the hypocrisy in all of this. To even think about discriminating against these children and making them wear masks only if they are not vaccinated would then wreak havoc on his emotional health.
Masks have done enough damage here, and I won't stand for it anymore. For my children, wearing masks is not the best solution. For others, it might be, which is why freedom to choose for our individual circumstances is a beautiful thing. I would never expect anyone to take on the burden of worrying about my health or my children's health. I should not be expected to take on the burden of other people's health. Please vote to make masks optional this fall. Thank you.
Next is Jan Shaw. Next up is Jan Shaw. After Jan is Harold Bonks.
Having trouble hearing you. Was that Jan Shaw you called?
Yes.
That's me. Okay, I'm going to switch topics just a tiny bit here. I looked at the fact that you're posting handbooks, and in those handbooks, I see some new subjects in here. It talks about an area that's going to talk about acts of hate and racism. Have we been having major problems in our district with racism? They weren't here a few years ago. My kids graduated. Just a question. It talks about a culture and climate of equity. So what's equity? It also talked about sex equity. What's sex equity? And it talked about no tolerance for aggression, including unintended acts of aggression. What's that? Okay, next I'm going to go to an Illinois Constitution. Article 1, Bill of Rights, Section 20. And I'm not going to read the whole thing to you in the interest of time, but the basic gist of it is it says they condemn anything that punishes, reprimands, blah, 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 having to do with identity politics such as racism, your sexual, your gender, blah, blah, blah. Okay. District 200, February 24th, 2021. So that was just a few months ago. At a meeting of the whole, Dr. Chris Salagi and Dr. Poyle gave a presentation about what equity is. They said that there's been 100 District 200 teachers and administrators who've been trained in equity by a guy named Dr. Howard, whoever he is, and that all schools now have an equity task force or team, and that they're working on getting equity out to all teachers in all buildings. Okay? What else do we have here? I also noted that it came from the DuPage Regional Office of Education. They have an equity network there. I know about a year or so, I remember something about calling JCO, which is the Joint Committee of Administrative Rules, Republicans and Democrats down in Springfield, who voted to let a new rule that the Illinois State Board of Education put in, which was causing you to do stuff. I'm going to continue for just a minute here.
2 minutes, please.
Anyway, basically, equity is equal achievement. You talk about equity as being equal achievement based on racial groups or identity groups. It talks about being comfortable with making people uncomfortable. I'm sorry, nobody should make our students uncomfortable. This is, for those of you who've told my friend, we don't have critical race theory here, it is critical race theory. Critical race theory is basically...
2:30, Ms. Shaw. 2:30.
We have oppressors. I'm going to finish in 1 second. We have oppressors, we have victims. Whites are inherently oppressors. Non-whites or non-Asians are inherently victims. I ended here, but I know you guys know me, and it's on DuPage Watchdogs for those who want more detail. Thank you.
Next is Harold Bonk. After Harold is Don Nebraski.
Good evening. My name is Harold Lawrence, and I am a resident of District 200. I'm a member of the CAC committee and also part of the subcommittee to review the applicants to join the CAC this coming school year. I was impressed with the number of applicants, which was 36. Currently, there are 10 open slots. The subcommittee methodologically reviewed the applications and additional follow-up questionnaire. Some of the applicants were not considered for the following reasons: living outside the district, incomplete applications, and not responding to the questionnaire. There was a good pool of candidates to choose from. Dr. Schuler reminded us that we needed equal representation by residents living within the 4 middle school boundaries and residents that will have future D200 students. The subcommittee consisted of 5 members, and almost every decision was unanimous. The candidates list 13 names. We added 3 additional names due to a large number of applicants and the possibility of members stepping down during the school year. With board approval, the CAC subcommittee welcomes these new members. Also, regarding the mask, it's amazing that, we're going to force our, elementary school teachers to wear masks. In the meantime, every board member and every administrator here doesn't even wear a mask. So I just find that kind of strange. So I hope the mask mandate disappears. Thank you.
Next is Dan Nebraski. After that is Joe Mauer.
Hi, my name is Don Nebraski. I'm a parent of 2 grade schoolers and 1 middle schooler, and I'm formally requesting that masks are not required to be worn by our children attending school this upcoming year. Masks are neither socially nor emotionally healthy for our children to be wearing all day, and we have witnessed firsthand over this last year that children are not at a high risk for serious symptoms if they contract COVID. In addition to what we've actually experienced as parents and as a community this last year, the Illinois Department of Public Health has published the leading causes of death by age group for Illinois residents on the website. For the age groups of 1 through 17, there was 5 underlying causes of death: accidents, assault or homicide, suicide, cancer, and finally congenital or chromosomal abnormalities. Out of the 552 total deaths of children aged 1 through 17 in Illinois in 2020, not one was attributed to COVID as an underlying cause of death. COVID was not an underlying cause of death for the age group of 18 to 24 either on the website. So, ages 1 through 24 have a 100% survival rate from COVID. This data shows us that children under 18 are not at a high risk of serious illness if COVID is contracted. I've yet to hear of any cases of a typically healthy child who went to school one day, contracted COVID, and as a result ended up dead. I urge you, for the social and emotional well-being of our children, to assess the risks of serious illness and to do that assessment outside of the context of fear. People die in motor vehicle accidents almost every day in our state. When I load up my family in our minivan and we drive down Roosevelt Road, I have to do a risk assessment. There's a chance that we can be involved in an accident and get seriously injured, or even somebody might be killed in a minivan as we drive down the road. But I don't stop driving because someone was killed in a motor vehicle accident the day before. I do understand that some parents will not feel safe unless their children are wearing a mask, even though the survival rate's 100% and the statistics are there, and even though that the children that did contract COVID over this last year, they did not experience any serious symptoms. In that case, I do believe that it would be appropriate for those students that elect to wear a mask to be allowed to do so. But please do not require all children or your staff to have to wear a mask. Thank you.
Next up is Joe Mauer, and Lily Gurak is after that.
Hello, my name is Joe Mauer. I have 2 students in District 200. I think what a lot of people have been able to deal with over the last year and a half, or almost year and a half, is a bit of the unknown. Unfortunately, well, fortunately now, the numbers are in and we're dealing in familiar territory. Of these numbers, in the last year, almost a half, of the 600,000 deaths from COVID, a grand total of about 335 were from the ages 18 and below. Now, every death is sad, of course, but we entered the fall of 2019 school season without any talk of any sort of disease mitigation. But in the 2018 through 2019 flu season, flu took the lives of 427 children. Also unfortunate. However, all things being said, there are 53 million student-age kids in the United States. Now, in addition to this, as been mentioned by others, the negative effects of reduced, academic experience in regards to the lack of social and emotional exchanges have begun. Higher suicide rates, depression, drug use. While I'm unhappy with the fact that this experience has taken up almost 15% of my 10-year-old's life and 12.5% of my 12-year-old's life, I can only imagine how much more significant the effects have been for a child that entered kindergarten in 2019. It has a little over a semester of actual full normal academic experience. Basically, 3/4 of his or her experience has been stunted in things like reading social cues and emotional cues, along with forming early childhood bonds with peers, are certainly delayed, if not permanently corrupted. In short, forced anonymity is not harmless. It should have now. The other reason for not wearing masks is to prevent children from spreading COVID among themselves and at home. Thank you, sir.
Lily Gurak. After Lily is somebody named Sarah that crossed their name off, so I'm not quite sure if that person is still planning on. Are you going to speak? Okay. Thank you. Lily?
Hi, my name is Lily. I am a sophomore at Wheaton North, and I will be sharing my experience about wearing masks at school. I believe that wearing masks should be a choice because it can get really uncomfortable. I was involved in show choir and theater, and some days I was wearing a mask for over 10 hours, and also while performing, and it just got very tiring and it made it hard to breathe. I feel a lot of the whole school year was taken away because there wasn't any dances, sports game, or any social gatherings. It was also really hard to make new friends because a lot of the clubs and activities were canceled, and if they did have them, then they were like spread apart, and we couldn't really talk to anyone really. It was, and I think a lot of people missed seeing everyone's expressions and smiles, which made it kind of sad. And I feel safe not wearing a mask, and I feel like a lot of other students feel safe not wearing one. And if anyone does feel safe for wearing one, then I think they should have that choice and wear one. And all I want is the choice. Thank you.
Next up is Sarah. After Sarah is Dave Schroeder.
Hi, my name is Sarah. I'm a parent of medically fragile children. While I understand that nobody wants to wear a mask, I'm part of the community that needs people to make the choice to wear a mask. My children, anytime they get sick, we always risk having complications. But after speaking to their doctors, there's kids that are in the hospital. There's currently variants going around where there are children on life support, and we don't know what that is going to look like a few months from now when we are back indoors and not out in the open, in the fresh air, running around with our children. I don't have the luxury. For me, it's not a want. Of course, I don't want my children to have to wear masks, but in order for us to be safe, in order for us to mitigate the risks, we need other people to wear masks and care about those people that cannot fight these viruses like you guys can. You're lucky that you don't have sick children.
I do.
You do, and you know what?
Got it.
You can have IEPs.
Please let her finish.
You can have an IEP that says that you do not have to wear masks.
Comments to you, please.
Please direct the comments toward me.
Sorry,
Thank you.
Somebody responded behind me and it threw me off. I apologize. There is the place of VA, and we're so thankful that we had that last year, but as we know, it is hard for children to learn online. And in order for every child to have an in-person experience, if we wear masks, we can make it a safer place for everybody's children to learn, as opposed to just healthy children. So please, think about those people that don't have a voice, that are very small and standing behind, because I know that I am representing other people's children, and I just ask that you think about them as well. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Sarah. Dave Schroeder is next, and Katie Wood after that. Yes.
My name is Dave Schroeder. I have 3 kids in the district. I'm going to keep it short because most people have said what I was going to say. Sorry. Is that? All right. So first of all, I'd like to thank the parents for coming tonight. It's important that our voices are heard. And I'd especially like to thank the kids that spoke today. This is why we're here. I hope you listen to what they say. This affects them the most. They're the ones that have to go through this. It's very difficult. Everybody lists the reasons on how it affects them. You're here representing them. It takes a lot of courage to do that, girls. You shouldn't have to do that. That's our job. It's your job. They shouldn't have to, at that age, come up here and defend their rights and their choice. That's our job. So again, I'm going to wrap this up. You know where we stand, and I'll remind you all, you work for us. You've heard our emails, you've seen our petitions, you've seen the districts around us, we all know what's going on, you heard our voices, do your jobs, please.
Katie Wood. After Katie Wood is Jennifer Castillo. I stand here before you as a minority. I've been a minority for the past year and a half. But I want to thank you for giving me this opportunity to come here and speak in front of you. I sincerely apologize that once again, this board is going to be faced with a decision to make, and no matter which way you choose, you're going to have a group that isn't happy. And for that, I really respect you guys and the decisions that you've made in the past few months. Yesterday, I was one of the many that wrote you a letter, and to put a face with the name, I'm the one that shared my story about my now 5-year-old son, who underwent a respiratory virus 3 years ago and almost died. Now, although this respiratory virus was obviously not COVID, it was a respiratory virus that I saw the effects for 4 months straight, and still am seeing those effects today. I, as a member and a mother in this community, would never want to see anyone in this community go through what me and my family went through for those 4 months. And that's why I stand here before you. I feel as though that your decision tonight, although difficult, clearly, is an easy one for the elementary level. I'm going to read to you the CDC current guidelines, which I know you guys know. Masks should be worn indoors by all individuals 2 and older who are not vaccinated. They recommend that schools maintain at least a 3-foot social distancing indoors combined with masks for those not fully vaxxed. So really, the choice is not about the mask. The choice is about the vaccine. And I understand, I don't know if I want my children to be masked. But I think that you as the board members would rather err on with these guidelines in caution of any chance of any potential outbreak that we don't know how that would affect, because last year everybody was masked, and avoid quarantine or worse, shutdown. Thank you very much. Jennifer Castillo.
Can you hear me? I feel a little short next to this. My name is Jennifer Castino. I've been a District 200 resident for 10 years. My only child is entering 5th grade in the district this fall. I want to thank the Board of Education and the D200 administration for your tireless efforts on behalf of our kids and our community in an unprecedented, ongoing crisis. My child has a rare medical condition and is at a higher risk for COVID complications. Deciding what to do about the 2020 to 21 school year was for us, as it was for so many parents, fraught with uncertainty. It required numerous conversations with district staff, administrators, and our son's medical team. He was able to go to school safely this past year because of the carefully considered multi-layered mitigations, including universal masking, put in place by the district. Our child thrived this past year despite his medical and learning challenges because of the exceptional educators in this district and the many precautions taken to ensure our children's health and safety. As you make decisions about this upcoming school year, I encourage you to do what you've done consistently for the past 16 plus months. Put our children first. Make decisions based on science, collaboration with community and public health partners, and the professional input of our wonderful D200 educators. I appreciate the board's willingness to listen to voices from all sides while supporting the best and not always easiest or most popular options to keep our kids and teachers safe. Someday, I hope our collective grief, fear, and anxiety from this time will fade. I pray what remains are memories of those who reminded us that together we can do hard things. Thank you for your leadership, and thank you for doing the hard things.
Next up is Suzanne Fitch, after that Amber Brown.
Hi, everyone. I'm Suzanne Fitch. I'm on the Wheaton City Council, and I have kids in the district. There's new information and studies about the use of face masks to prevent COVID, and the recommendations are not consistent. Mandatory face mask policies have had unintended harmful consequences for our kids. The use of face masks at school should be a choice made by each family and student. Some fully vaccinated people continue to wear a mask, and that's okay. We need to respect each other's personal decisions. Let's remind our children to be respectful and kind about the choices made by their classmates. The Wheaton City Council has not considered any type of ordinance mandating face masks. The Wheaton Park District has not mandated that children wear face coverings to participate in indoor and outdoor activities this summer. I inquired about this issue with the DuPage County Health Department, and they responded by saying, quote, DuPage County Health Department does not generally have the ability or authority to institute mandatory mask requirements. As for IDPH and ISBE, legislation has not been passed delegating authority to these state agencies to address these issues in the classroom. House Bill 2789 would have given new powers to IDPH and ISBE, including the power to shut down both public and private schools during a declared public health emergency. There was overwhelming opposition to the bill, as it would have taken away local control of our schools. The bill was not called for a vote in the Senate. It never became law. So where does that leave you? You are left with guidance, not law. I understand that the school district has an interest in minimizing the spread of COVID in the schools, but you should focus on the mitigation strategies that are in your control: daily cleaning, proper ventilation, hand washing, testing. Let each family make their own choice regarding face masks. Thank you.
Next up, Amber Brown. After Amber, Kira Zizzo. Okay, Kira.
It's okay. Tell me your name.
This is Kira Zizzo. She is, it's okay. She's going to be in first grade at Bauer. She's been wanting to talk, and she's here because you want to do it? It's okay. Why don't you like to wear a mask, honey? Kira has anxiety. She has abandonment issues. Wearing a mask takes away from her ability to be able to read facial cues. The 2 years she spent at Jefferson were incredible in her development. This past year was extremely difficult, and the setbacks were heartbreaking. I ask
you right now to look around this room. Not one of you asked any of these children that came in this building today to put a mask on. She wants to do it herself. So you go away. Okay. You can do it yourself. Do you want me to step away too, or do you want me to stand here?
Okay. My name's Kira. I'm gonna go to first grade. I don't like to wear a mask because it's really affecting me, and I have a bad runny nose, so it really makes, and when I do this, it gets my mask all wet, and then I have to breathe from my mouth. Then at school I don't, then it goes in my mouth, and then I have a sicky tummy. And then it gets infection, and then I come home, and I say I'm not feeling good. And that's done.
Good job.
Thank you, Kira. Amber Brown and then Kelly Gillingwater.
My name is Amber Brown. I stood before you several times in the last school year when I had 3 children at Wheaton, Warrenville South, a senior, a junior, and a freshman. After what can be described as an abysmal and disappointing year, my oldest has graduated and moving on to college. This year I will have a senior as well as a sophomore, and I would like for them to have a very normal year. This is completely possible. Many of my friends who spoke to you last year and implored the school to be open, move forward have left the district and the state and are living in states that allow kids to be without these unnecessary restrictions. The CDC issued new guidance last Friday, and IDPH is fully adopting that guidance. When issuing the guidance, Erin Saber-Schatz, who leads the CDC task force that prepares recommendations designed to keep Americans safe from COVID-19, stated, "The guidance is really written to allow flexibility at the local level." There's a section in there that references that, Section 1, and numerous districts throughout Illinois have already referenced this section from the CDC to inform their districts that masks will be optional this school year. It is highly unlikely that COVID is going away anytime soon, if ever. We must learn to live with it and move forward. Children are at very low risk from the virus, and those who are at risk do have the option of remote learning. We don't lock down or cover the faces of students for the flu. We should not be doing it for COVID. At this point, every person over the age of 12 that wishes to be vaccinated has had that opportunity. This is a personal and family choice. Last year, we heard about the need to protect the teachers and older members of the community. They have all been eligible for the vaccine for months. I realize our elementary students and younger middle school students are not eligible, but they are at very low risk. So please do not mask the younger students or any of our students when classes resume in a few weeks. And do not require unnecessary quarantines for students that show no symptoms. This did little to prevent transmission last year, but did a great deal to restrict their learning environment and education. Thank you.
Kelly Gillingwater.
Hi, I'm back. I'll be brief. As I was saying, she has severe anxiety as well as a host of other things. And this year she was not able to be fully reevaluated because of the protocols that were in place this year. I have a medically fragile child. My son has graduated this year under extremely difficult circumstances. He was symptomatic COVID, was in the hospital, and I have to tell you, he went on in 3 months, I should say 4 months, from March to June, did 3 what you consider high-risk sports: football, wrestling, and lacrosse. 2 weeks overlapped all 3, graduated with honors, captain of the lacrosse team. The child thrived once he was back in that building, and he is not vaccinated. These kids are capable of doing the right things. Wrestling, the most risky of all, no masks worn on that mat. This state, in our area, had no COVID cases. They got their modified seasons in. Private organization gave a state series. If anybody was going to get COVID, those were the kids, and they did not. So I ask you, let it be a parent's choice as to what they choose to do, what's best for their child. As you can see, we are facing the choice of, if she has the mask, we have the choice that everybody else has had all along. We can go to school under your guidelines. We can homeschool, or we can go to private school. It is a decision that you make today that affects the decisions of every parent in this district and how many students you potentially could be losing.
Board members, we've only got 6 people left, so I think we should just finish the 6. 6.
Yeah, let's just go.
So we're going to let everybody speak on the first round. Shannon Lemchenko. After Shannon is Allison Williams. Good evening. My name is Shannon Lemchenko. I'm the parent of 2 District 200 elementary school students. And it is my hope that this board will listen to our public health and medical experts, including the CDC and the American Academy of Pediatrics, who all urge continued use of masks indoors for children who are not yet vaccinated against COVID-19. We know that COVID-19 can be spread in schools and summer camps when mitigation measures are not used. Over the past few months, there have been numerous outbreaks of COVID-19 in summer camps that have not required masking, including a camp in Illinois. We know that most kids infected with COVID-19 do relatively well, but there are still risks. Children do get sick, and some of them get very sick, as evidenced by a report just this week that there are 7 children with COVID in Mississippi who are in intensive care. There hasn't yet been enough research around the long-term effects of COVID-19 in kids. And experts also fear that kids may keep the virus circulating in our community, possibly allowing it to mutate into yet another variant that could be more harmful to children. We know that it is safe for kids to wear masks. Despite what has been said earlier, experts have weighed in on this, including the American Academy of Pediatrics. And we saw this with our own eyes all last school year. Our kids wore masks in school. It was safe. Finally, we know that masks work. In fact, they are identified by experts as the most important COVID mitigation measure. They are low cost, they are easy to implement, and can prevent much more expensive and intrusive interventions like routine testing, ventilation system overhauls, and school shutdowns. If a simple thing like wearing a mask can keep our kids in the classroom and potentially keep our community safer, it seems like common sense to err on the side of caution and to err on the side of experts like the AAP and the CDC by keeping masking requirements in our schools. My kids and their friends wore masks to school all last year, and although they are not here tonight, they would tell you that it's no big deal. They clearly understand that they wear masks to protect themselves and others, just like they understand that they can't bring a peanut butter sandwich to snack time to protect their classmates with allergies. Our children have easily grasped the concept of collective responsibility, and it is my hope that our community will as well. Thank you. Next is Allison Williams, and after that, Jessica Hockett.
Hello, I have an elementary student at Whittier, and I'm here first and foremost to come here today to remind you guys what the CDC recommendations are that came out on July 9th. The CDC recommends that this and states that, quote, masks should be worn indoors by all individuals aged 2 and older who are not fully vaccinated. Consistent and correct mask use by people who are not fully vaccinated is especially important indoors in crowded settings. I want to see school go back to normal. I want to see kids learn in groups, use manipulatives, and collaborate on work again. I had a kindergartner last year who sat in his own desk in a row and learned by himself. That is not the school day I want for my kid this year. And we can go back to that sense of normalcy with one exception, wearing masks. If a district chooses to blatantly disregard the CDC recommendations, they are potentially opening themselves up to a huge liability concerns. If my son contracts, I'll wait.
Ladies and gentlemen, please give her the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. If my son contracts COVID from school and ends up being one of the small percentage of people who have long-term health concerns, I will make sure that he is provided the proper medical care with the help of the district for his lifetime because of the decisions of keeping him around
We can be respectful, please.
Because he is around unmasked, unvaccinated children. Secondly, masks are worn not only to protect the person wearing them, but to protect others around them. This is a great moment to teach our children the importance of caring for others, the importance of protecting the vulnerable teacher that might not have been able to get vaccinated, the vulnerable classmate that is immunocompromised. He understands the importance of showing kindness, caring, love, and support for other people in his school and in his community. Those are the lessons I have taught my son. He gladly puts his ever he goes. So I ask that the board resume school day as they normally would, kids in group, learning together, collaborating on work with masks on to protect and care for each other. Thank you for this time.
Next up is Jessica.
It's absurd.
Honestly, we have children here that are watching this. Jessica Hockett.
Good evening, my name is Jessica Hockett. My husband and I just moved to Wheaton and will have a fifth grader at Longfellow. We sent you a lengthy letter today asking that masks be optional for all students. You prioritized in-person instruction for elementary kids last fall, so we are confident that you will make the child-centered choice. Here's why masks should be optional. First, no law or rule compels you to require students to mask. The decision is local, yours to make, and will not result in loss of funding. The governor's office reiterated those things last night in a statement to WGN News. Second, COVID is not a severe disease for all but the fewest of children. We provided plentiful data in that regard in our letter, but let me also just say here that no one under the age of 20 in DuPage County has died from COVID to date, and that has nothing to do with masks. Third, for something to be mandated, it should first be proven as effective. Cloth has had more than enough time to prove itself as a virus mitigant, and it has failed. There is no evidence that masks work in schools. Data worldwide has shown clearly that children are inefficient transmitters of the virus. In-school transmission is not high, and school mask mandates are not associated with fewer COVID cases. Prolonged mask wearing also has predictably negative effects on language development, communication, relationships, mood. We heard from students about that today. Students who are medically vulnerable to any virus should be accommodated like they have always been in schools, but that should not involve other kids being forced to do things that compromise their own health, well-being, and convictions. Finally, and most importantly, it makes zero sense to require masks in school when child masking is not being enforced practically any place else, including church, stores, restaurants, sports camp, the salon, library, the sports center, parks, pools, and in friends' cars and houses. There is simply no intellectually honest way to explain what makes school, for example, Longfellow Elementary, more dangerous than downtown Wheaton, because it is not. Please show the same courage you demonstrated last fall by making masks optional all. Thank you.
Margaret. After Margaret is Joe Masoni.
Hi, my name is Margaret Votala, and I have a student currently in district and one who just graduated. I'd like to, it's been told to me, and I believe that it's true, that DuPage County is one of the top 50 counties in the U.S. in terms of vaccinations, so we're in the top 50. So clearly the community has spoken with their feet in where they stand on what the CDC guidelines are and recommendations are, and I would ask you to continue to whatever the CDC recommends for this fall for the school district to continue following what the CDC guidelines are. Thank you.
Next up is Joe Masani, and then the last one is Mary Louise Hengensbach.
Hello, I'm Joe. I've been an environmental contractor for 30 years. I grew up in the industry my whole entire life. We've worn every kind of respirator that's made. But you know what kind of respirator is not allowed on any job sites in Illinois? Those. You want to know why? They don't work.
Every one of you should go to Home Depot tonight, get a piece of drywall, go in your garage, put that mask on, cut it up, and then later on pull the drywall nuggets out of your nose. They don't work. There's a reason why we have to go through pulmonary tests to get our license to do environmental work, to see if our lungs can handle wearing respirators. None of our kids have had this done. How many have had chest x-rays to see if their lungs can handle this? Anybody? Have any of you had it done? Nobody's had it done, but we're making people do asbestos and lead, environmental work like hexavalent chromium, histoplasmosis. They have to have all this done to wear these respirators, right? But the kids don't. Does this make any sense to anybody? That's it.
Last. Mary Lou.
My name is Mary Louise Hengesfaw. I have 3 children in the district, the oldest of whom is 10 years old and is a special needs child. I have been a mask user. I am a proponent of vaccines. I got the vaccine as soon as it was available to me. In March 2020, I was standing in Wheaton meet, masked with rubber gloves on. I got masks for my children as soon as they were available, and I have a child who actually has had required hospital care for a respiratory illness. Today, I urge you not to require masks, but instead to make them optional. And this is based on new scientific data. First of all, it's noteworthy that the CDC guidance lags the guidance of other nations, including also the World Health Organization. The World Health Organization states, should children wear a mask? Children aged 5 years and under should not be required to wear masks. This is based on the safety and overall interest of the child and the capacity to appropriately use the mask with minimal assistance. And it goes on to say for children aged 6 through 11 that masks should be based on the following factors: whether there is widespread transmission in the area where the child resides. As was noted earlier, our county is in the top 2% of vaccinations in the nation. We did not do this to participate in some silly vaccination lottery. We did this as parents. We put in this effort so that our children could have freedom, so that we could have our children have the joy of interacting with one another in schools in a healthy way. The World Health Organization also says in their guidance that children ages 6 to 11 also should only be required to wear masks in specific settings and interactions where the child is interacting with other people at high risk of developing serious illness, such as the elderly. So, for example, a nice compromise could be that if a group is doing a field trip to a nursing home, then in that case masks should be required. But really, it is not fair to the kids to be having to bear a disproportionate amount of the burden when actually they are not transmitters of the virus, and also when they are when the COVID has been shown to be less of a risk to kids than the flu. Thank you.
That concludes our public comment on agenda items. Next up is Superintendent Report. Dr. Schuler.
Thank you.
I'll be less than a minute, I promise.
Okay. Go ahead.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Brian. I come to speak today about the mask mandates. As having someone whose family fled Eastern Bloc countries and the Soviet bloc, for the greater good is the scariest words we could ever hear. And just remember, some of the most evil things in history have been done with the best of intentions. So the last thing I would like to say is, I talked to law enforcement. A lot of law enforcement are finding out that human traffickers are using the masks so they can conceal people and traffic them. We got to get rid of these masks. And just to be clear, look how the mandatory mask mandates and mandatory vaccines are going in France. Turn on the news and find out. Thank you.
That concludes our public comment on agenda items. Dr. Schuler.
Yep, thank you.
On here, perfect. Very short report tonight because we obviously have an agenda item coming up that's going to occupy time. I did want to start my report tonight, though, by recognizing something I left off in my June report. We sent out a communication in June to the district recognizing Pride Month, and I neglected to mention that in my June superintendent report, and so wanted to come back and recognize Pride Month as a number of our community partners and agencies did in the month of June. Behind me stands our vision statement, which speaks to our importance to recognize every student in District 200. I'm going to move in a couple of minutes into our planning for next year. My hope, my aspiration for the community, even as we move forward with this, is just continuing to recognize that we do have to work together as a community as we navigate through these challenges. At some point, this board meeting this evening is going to conclude, and we are going to continue to need to be a community, and that's incredibly important as we move forward. For the board, I did want to mention one follow-up to a previous item from a couple of meetings ago. You might remember a few months back, we received some communication on playground funding, and a group that was doing some playground funding at one of our elementary schools, and asked the board for some consideration of a different model of playground funding moving forward. You might remember that the Facilities Committee completed its initial data review of playgrounds and was getting an assessment done of each of the playgrounds. We are very close to having all of those reports, and so we'll be bringing the Facility Committee back together to actually look at that data and formulate a recommendation to come forward to the full board here very soon. So again, just wanted to acknowledge and mention that that was forthcoming. With that, I'm going to stop because I know next after the consent agenda we're going to come back to this item of discussion for next year.
Okay, so we're going to do the consent agenda, and then we are moving the oral report up. So consent agenda. Acceptance of gifts from Lincoln Elementary School PTA. Acceptance of gifts from Whittier Elementary School PTA. Acceptance of gifts from Leesbrook Elementary School PTA. Approval to open previously closed minutes. Approval of e-learning plan. Approval of 2021-2022 Citizens Advisory Committee roster. Approval of the IASB 2021-2022 annual dues. Approval of network access control and firewall solution annual review. Approval of Sentinel-1 endpoint security antivirus. Approval of copier lease and maintenance agreement. Approval of xerographic bond paper bid. Approval of cold beverages contract services. Approval to increase paid lunch price. Approval to purchase student desks through purchasing cooperative. Approval of 2021-2022 guest teacher substitute pay teacher pay rates. Approval of bills payable and payroll. Approval of minutes June 9th, 2021 open, and approval to destroy recordings of closed sessions prior to February 2020 is allowable by law. And approval of personnel report to include employment, resignation, retirement, and leave of absence of administrative, certified, classified, and non-union staff. Are there any items board members want removed from the consent agenda? Dr. Schuler, is there any other information?
No additional information.
Are there any questions and comments from board members?
Chris, can I ask a question?
Yes.
It's okay to ask a question and still leave it there.
You can ask questions here in regards to consent.
So I failed to ask the question, I apologize, with the Pepsi contract,
beverage contract.
The beverage contract. So there on section 6, paragraph 6, there was a section A stated, no competitive product shall be sampled, sold, served, or dispensed anywhere at the facilities. Is there a conflict of interest when we have parents who bring in, a case of water for an event that's going on? Like, is that serving a non-Pepsi?
No, there would not be. So that's speaking specifically to our vending contracts. So it's speaking to our vending machines, not such I think you're talking about, like if a booster group or another parent group is doing an outside of school activity, that doesn't apply.
Thank you.
Any other questions from board members? Okay, I'd like to ask for a motion in a second to approve the consent agenda as presented.
So moved.
Who was the first one? I'm sorry. Mrs. Wheaton?
Was it you? I'm sorry. So moved. Yes.
Second then by Mr. Hanlon. Mrs. Hutchinson, will you please call the roll?
Yes.
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 Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. The item that everybody has been waiting for tonight. We've moved our oral reports up. So the first is update on Illinois State Board of Education guidance for the 2021-2022 school year. Dr. Schuler?
Thank you, Mrs. Crabtree. So I'm going to wait and make sure the presentation comes up here before we get started. Thank you.
Hey, Dr. Schuler, before you start tonight, I just want to clarify everybody, this is not an action item of the Board of Education. This is just an oral report by our administration.
We will have the opportunity as a board, though, to comment. Yes.
Okay, so update for guidance for the upcoming school year. So I do want to just start as we move into presentation tonight with a reminder of the board of a couple of our foundational beliefs that guided our work last year. And I start with these foundational beliefs because they will continue to guide the work that we do moving forward. We certainly spent last year very focused on safety of our kids, safety of our staff. We focused last year on academic programs, social emotional programs. We focused as we moved through the year on the importance of relationships and efforts to rebuild relationships, and we focused on creating a plan that we absolutely felt in compliance with any of the guidance agencies that we worked with last year. And so I just mentioned that certainly as a foundation this evening because it's important to know and recognize that as things evolve, that does not mean that we have stopped following guidance, that we've stopped following those foundational beliefs. Throughout last year, we continued to adjust, we continued to modify our plan, we continued to make adjustments based on information that we had throughout the year. And I just want to mention at the onset that I think especially last year, it was mentioned earlier that there has been a significant volume of communication over the last 48 hours from the community. And I think one of the consistent themes in that communication truly was a level of appreciation for the work that we did last year as we implemented opportunities for kids. We did so safely and we found an experience that was productive. So just by way of a reminder for the board, this is how we ended the 2020-21 school year. So just highlighting the mitigations because they evolved through the year. We ended the school year with a physical distancing definition of 3 to 6 feet. We ended the school year by still asking parents to do at-home COVID symptom screening and keep their kids home if they were sick. We ended the school year, continued to focus on hand hygiene practices, cleaning and disinfecting practices. We ended the school year focused on ventilation. Just as a reminder for the board, we studied every space inside of our buildings to measure airflow and air turnover per hour to ensure that we were in full compliance. We updated our furnace. Glad I'm losing the word.
The filters and
filters. Thank you. I'm sorry. We updated our filters to the highest level. We certainly ended the year with masks required on bus. We did have to do contact tracing at 6 feet at the end of the year. We did data monitoring and case reporting. Continued to do that right up to the end of the year. We of course had an optional COVID surveillance testing program with Safeguard that stayed in place to the end of the year. As we got toward the end of the year, we continued to share information, both of opportunities that the district was aware of and some opportunities that community partners asked us to host on site for vaccination and, of course, masks in schools. So July the 9th, new guidance came out.
from CDC and immediately adopted by the Illinois Department of Public Health, and a couple of important updates that were a part of that guidance. Many of these things you've heard referenced in a variety of comments both tonight and in written communication that you've received. Clearly, the new guidance puts a priority on in-person schooling opportunities, clearly says that the effort is to ensure that guidance does not get in the way of our ability to accommodate all students. Talks a lot about layers of mitigation and the importance of layers of mitigations. There are, of course, some recommendations in there I'll come back to, but there is a notable shift in that guidance to local control in terms of decision-making, but with some specific suggestions on the type of information that we look at as a part of that. And so tonight what you're going to hear as I walk through both what that guidance is as well as our recommendation as we move forward is a recognition of this topic of local control and the importance of local control, and a part of local control is in recognizing, as we have in a variety of other places around the community and through mitigation efforts, a recognition that part of local control is also in recognizing where it's appropriate to include some choice in that local control. Again, new guidance actually covered a couple of these things, originated with CDC. It shared with the board that we had anticipated that coming. The Illinois State Board of Education, consistent with IDPH, did adopt that guidance. I do still absolutely expect in the coming weeks that there will be some updated FAQs from the Illinois State Board of Education that will hopefully continue to bring clarity around a few topics that we're going to talk about this evening. And again, this guidance recognizes the fundamental importance of in-person learning, certainly for the well-being of students, families, and communities, and we're urged to prioritize full-time access to in-person learning. The guidance does focus on the importance of vaccination, certainly as a mitigation strategy, but allows, again, as I mentioned, more local control of the decision-making. So what are a couple of the things that are included in that new guidance document that comes from CDC? One, physical distancing is now clearly defined only as 3 feet, not 3 to 6 feet, a straight 3-foot destination or designation for physical distancing. It does continue to recognize the importance of regular hand hygiene and respiratory etiquette. It does indicate language that masks should be worn from vaccinated individuals, especially when 3 feet of physical distancing can't be maintained. It does clearly indicate that on transportation, on our school buses, masks should be worn, but again begins to identify the areas where school districts have local control to begin removing prevention strategies based on local conditions, but again clearly indicates that as that begins to happen in that lower mitigation approach, we have to begin to remove them one at a time. So a little bit of context update for the board, just a review of a number of the items that are mentioned in that context of local control. Vaccination status within DuPage County. And again, I pulled this directly off of the headline. I think I saw an updated version of this today that ticked it up a little bit more. DuPage County does have a very strong vaccination rate, certainly as you look at it both within our state and nationally. According to the data that I've seen most recently, that as of July 7th, more than 80%, I believe it's now 81% of eligible residents aged 12 and up have had at least their first dose of vaccine, with 64% fully vaccinated, and 98% of our residents 65 and older have had at least one dose of vaccine, with 82% being fully vaccinated. DuPage County Health Department confirmed this data earlier this week as we met with them, and they also shared a few other metrics that I think are of importance to understand. Right? We are in a better spot
with COVID data than we have been virtually since the beginning of the pandemic. So again, as of 7/13, and you can see the trajectory of data from obviously our peak in the middle of last year to where we are currently with an average of 2.6 cases per day as a rolling average, especially for those 0 to 19, and total cases per 100,000 as of the last DuPage County reporting at 11 per 100,000, again lower than we've seen before. We've also shared with the board, as we monitored data through last year, the importance of looking at significant complications as a result of COVID. DuPage County Health Department did also share that their number of hospital admissions due to COVID is lower than it's been again since early in the pandemic. And so, again, for us, just important to recognize that we are in a different place now than we were certainly at various points through last year, even though we were at the end of the year. And again, while I don't have data to share with you now in terms of direct student impact because we haven't had students in our buildings, I will remind you that as we ended the school year, we ended the school year in the healthiest place that we have been from a COVID perspective in terms of both positive student cases and students that were out with COVID-related illness. So I think you see up here that the last 4 weeks of the school year, as we navigated toward the end of the year, we did have numbers that were very low, lower than they were at most points in the year. And so as we move forward then into our recommendation, my recommendation for you administratively, we do believe that we can continue to operate consistent with the guidance provided by our health authorities and by our health experts, and yet begin to talk about the rolling back of mitigations. Based on those current metrics that I've reviewed and vaccination levels, we do believe that we can recommend to the board the beginning of the removal of layered mitigations. So I'm going to fast forward right to, I guess, the important part of our recommendation. We do believe that we can continue to operate schools within that 3-foot definition of physical distancing. We recommend that we continue to start the year there. We do believe it continues to be critically important for all of our families, our parents, to continue to do symptom monitoring and absolutely keep their children at home if they're sick. We believe in the continued importance of hand hygiene practices. Candidly, I hope that's something that never goes away as we move beyond the pandemic. We believe in the continued importance of cleaning and disinfecting practices. We have continued to learn about the importance of sanitization of individual circumstances, so I do not anticipate that we will be cleaning desks between periods all year, but it is important that we continue to sanitize, certainly nightly and at key points during the day. Clear in the guidance is that masks are required on the bus. I have not seen any update that would suggest that there would be capacity limits on the bus as we move into this year. Thus, I think the reason for that recommendation, we of course will continue to monitor our data and our case reporting and make that information open and transparent to the community as we did all year. We do have the option of continuing with optional COVID testing, either surveillance testing, or there is a confirmatory version of that. And actually I saw an update just as of this morning that at least a couple of the options that have been supported through the end of the year would come to all school districts at no cost next year. So there would be no cost for any testing that we were to choose to do during the year. We do believe it's important that we continue to share information about vaccine opportunities from partners within the community, and obviously as we move through the year and opportunities for vaccine perhaps change or move to other age levels, I think that becomes important to do. And so I didn't fast forward because I went through all of them, but I moved down now to the bottom, and the one that we do recommend that we peel back at the start of the year, and that would be a required mask mandate for all students. Again, I want to be crystal clear that shifting the masking requirement from mandated to what we're recommending does not mean we do not support students and families that continue to choose to mask. That absolutely needs to be, should be their choice, and we need to create conditions in our schools that make families and students feel comfortable in exercising that choice, should they choose to. But we are recommending that we start with that mitigation that we would pull back first, and that recommendation would be across the system in District 200. So our recommendation, and I appreciate the opportunity to finish. Our recommendation and our rationale is that we recognize that districts have local control in their decision to remove prevention strategies based on local conditions and based on the mitigations that they deem to be priority for their students. We believe those should be removed as we do, one at a time. And so, as I mentioned, we are recommending the first prevention strategy be mask wearing. It is important that, again, as I mentioned, that we create conditions that will still allow for a comfortable circumstance for all students to make that choice. I remind the board that your current policy 4.182 on face coverings does have language in the bottom of that policy that indicates that the policy shall apply at any time. ISB or IDPH joint guidance recommends face coverings to be used in Illinois, but based on changes in that guidance and our decision that it complies with that, you have granted me through the policy authority to temporarily establish rules around face coverings or to suspend the policy consistent with that change and consistent with the rationale that we laid out. I want to be really, really clear. My reasoning for recommending that this policy be suspended through my authority is that if we deem at any point it necessary to temporarily come back in and require face coverings, we are going to continue to monitor case data, potential outbreak data, as we did all year, and we need to make sure that we have the authority, if we need to, on a temporary basis, to reinstitute a mitigation if we're seeing a shift from what we've identified certainly as the rationale. And again, I want to be clear to the board as we worked through last year. Recognize that we worked through a variety of decision points last year. We worked through an initial decision to obviously start an in-person experience at our elementary level. That was not universally supported, certainly within the community. With every change you made during the year, you certainly received feedback on those sides of that. But important to recognize that with every change, we were crystal clear that because we were making that change based on our review of information important, that we wanted to make sure we have the ability to come back and adjust that should we need to. So again, we would recommend through policy 4.182, I guess I would recommend that I would be suspending that policy based on the recommendation that's in front of you. I do still want to just recognize two final things that I think are important as we navigate through this. Clarity continues to be expected around the issue of close contact and quarantine, that is one area where we do work very closely with the DuPage County Health Department as we carry out any type of case investigation, any type of outbreak investigation, or any type of case monitoring. And we will continue to do that with them. Right now, they are still defining close contact as within 6 feet for an unvaccinated individual not wearing a mask. We are hopeful as we move toward the start of the year that we will continue to see some adjustment in that language, especially with the new clear definition around physical distancing at 3 feet. But we do continue to follow that decision tree by IDPH as we address individual circumstances. Important, though, to note, as we did last year, if we do have situations where students have to quarantine, we will provide educational supports and services for the student during that period of time. And then finally, I just want to mention, as I have already shared, that we will continue to monitor student cases via our dashboard. We will continue to report that very openly, transparently to our community as we did all year, and we'll work with the DuPage County Health Department on any investigations around potential outbreaks. I recognize, I shared with the board, we shared with the community last year, we did not see outbreaks last year with the mitigations with the work that we did in our schools, and I would not be recommending this plan to you this evening if I felt as though we were putting the community at risk of that. And as I mentioned, we certainly will reserve the right to come back and make an adjustment if we see a temporary need at an individual circumstance, a school, if we do in fact see an outbreak of any kind. We will reserve the right to re-implement a mitigation if need be on a temporary basis. So that is really our recommendation. Again, I want to recognize that we have not gone through the kind of the holistic return to school plan. We anticipate much of our operation next year kind of returning to normal practices, but we wanted to focus on a few of these key mitigations tonight, and especially where we believe we should start in terms of rolling back mitigations. So I will stop and answer any questions from the board. And again, I guess I just want to be clear, I think back to Mr. Paulson's point. So I'm not asking you to formally roll back a policy based on the last couple of slides, but I am certainly asking to understand where the board sits around my execution of that language within the policy, because I want to make sure that as I make that decision, that certainly the board is supportive of it.
Mr. Paulson, I see your hand right there, ready to go. Would you like to start?
Are we ready for discussion?
Yeah.
Yeah, I always had to go last over.
I think we can do discussion and question at the same time.
I always had to go last for the last year and a half, so I'm going to take advantage of the opportunity to go first. I guess the one thing I've learned in my 8 years on the board that it's important to, if you want somebody to understand what you're saying, say less. So I'm going to, while I have prepared comments, most of them were covered in Dr. Schuler's presentations, so I'm just going to really kind of reinforce 5 quick bullet points of where I am on this issue. So I fully endorse the recommendations presented tonight and really appreciate the simplicity and directness of the report tonight. I suggest we use the same language as CDC in all of our operational plans and communications with our community. So language like recommended, should, those are important words, and I would like to kind of replicate those in everything that we push out. I think Dr. Schuler said really well where I am in terms of supporting those students who choose to wear a mask, and even those teachers. I think that's going to be a critical element of making this year successful. There's been a lot of talk in email and even on social media about segregation. I really have no idea where that came from. I don't think in my 8 years on the board that word's even been used once. That hasn't been part of any plans. We know that elementary students won't be vaccinated, so I would support any kind of optional testing for anyone that's willing to do that. We as a board supported that model last year, and I think it was helpful and beneficial, so I would fully endorse continuing that, and if we are able to do it through the state's funded program at no additional cost, I have no reason to imagine why we wouldn't want to try to encourage it again. But of course, optional. And then finally, my last point is that I would like to continue to make sure we explore, propose, and implement any operational plans necessary to make sure kids stay in school and have an environment that best supports learning. So those are my 5 points that kind of represent my position and comments. I really have no questions. I thought it was well done, and that's all I have to say.
I'd like to go next. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Schuler, for the report. I agree with Brad that it was, I appreciate the simplicity of it, the directness of it, and the explanations. And I think as we, I've said this before, that, as we sit here and make these decisions, we are making decisions for 12,000 plus students and 2,000 plus staff. And this isn't, when I make these decisions sitting here, I sit in the seat not representing a certain constituency. I don't let my personal beliefs get in the way. I simply look at the job of, following what's best for our district, following the law, following public health guidance in the middle of an unprecedented global pandemic. I think that this is for some reason turned into a very divisive issue, which baffles me a bit, but I want to start from a place where we can all, every single person in this room can stand together, and that is we want our students to have as normal of a school year as possible in the safest environment possible. And I think we can all agree to start there. I'm going to, like Brad, I'm going to briefly explain, my decisions, but I do feel the need to know that while I do very much appreciate the community feedback, I always encourage people to write the board with whatever they like. I want to be clear that none of my decision-making was based on intimidation or fear that some members of our community have tried to use. I base the decision on factual, credible information and public health guidance, and as I said, I leave the emotion and the personal beliefs out of it. The updated CDC guidance does give us some direction. It ultimately leaves the decision to local jurisdictions. And based on community transmission and vaccination rates, and as we saw, and I found that on my own over the weekend too, there are low transmission rates and high vaccination rates, which is fantastic. Thank you to Page County. While those numbers are very encouraging, I think the least older board members that have been here, or longer board members, know that I don't like to assume anything. I like data. And an ask that I would have is, if we can, and I realize that there might be some roadblocks here, I would like to see aggregate level data on vaccination rates for our student population and our staff. The CDC does reference this in their guidance, that school districts should know this information, but it does not provide a mechanism to do so. And I realize that there are issues around that. But my request for that is twofold, and I want to explain that. One is to verify that our school vaccination rates are in the ballpark of what our county numbers are showing, which are fantastic. But I would feel a little bit more comfortable knowing that our district was in that ballpark. The second is to help with contact tracing, in the sense that if our health office knows if a student or staff member is vaccinated, that would potentially alleviate communication needs on contacting close contacts. That they can see in their system that this staff member or this student is vaccinated. We don't need to, if I'm understanding the guidance right, that we don't need to contact them because they won't need to quarantine or whatever.
And I want to be clear that information would go through our health offices like any other health information that is communicated about our students. It doesn't go to anybody else in our district. I do agree with optional testing at the, I would say the elementary level and possibly for sixth graders. So it's kind of flipped from last year based on vaccine eligibility because, our 12 and older have that opportunity. And since our younger kids don't, that I would support an optional testing program. In the end, the updated CDC guidance this new guidance repeatedly uses the words should and recommended, which is a departure from the guidance last year, which used must and required. For me, that signals that not only schools, but also families can heed the mitigations that they wish to participate in when transmission is low and vaccination is high. That's very clear in the guidance. It's not the duty of the school board, but the duty of our community as a whole to keep that transmission rate low and our vaccination rate high. If we can do that, we can keep our kids in school with the least restrictions possible, and it's a group effort. There are two more points that I want to address. I'm going to flip these. The first is Dr. Schuler, as you said, that the mandate of the mask can return at any time based on an individual school or at the district level. If transmission rises in our community, we know that there are variants spreading rapidly across all states, including ours, and it's something that we will need to continually monitor as we move forward here. And again, our community at large needs to help us maintain these low transmission rates and high vaccination rates. That is something a school board cannot control, but we will need to respond to it if necessary. The last point I want to make is that, and this is for people on both sides of this issue, I can't stress that enough, and that I am asking for parents' help in addressing this issue with your children before the school year starts, that if we are going to make masks optional in school, we have to respect a family and student's choice in the matter whether you mask or not. No shaming, verbal name-calling, mocking, or taunting of any kind will be tolerated. As evidenced tonight by parents who said they would respect a person's choice to wear a mask, speakers were laughed at and heckled as they spoke in favor of wearing masks that cannot and will not stand in our schools. Thank you.
I'd like to go next. Dave?
I do have one question or clarification, on the close contact, as it's defined now, within 6 feet for unvaccinated individuals not wearing a mask. So anybody masked that's a close contact would not be quarantined?
Not at 3 feet. So as long as you're maintaining, if you're inside of 3 feet, close contact will always apply.
Mask or not?
There is no such thing as close contact or quarantine for vaccinated individuals based on that guidance. But right now, with a mask at 3 feet, it would not be a close contact. Without, at 6 feet, it would. Okay. According to the current definition as it stands today.
Okay, and then we're not tracking by individual whether they're vaccinated or not. So then if a person was a close contact, then they would bring evidence of being vaccinated to avoid being quarantined. Is that how it would work?
That would happen through our health office. So again, our health offices, our nurses that support the contact tracing did last year would continue to work with individual families.
Okay. Thank you. Because it kind of couples on what Brad said. This rhetoric in these emails on discrimination and segregation. I don't know where it comes from. Because we've never talked about disclosing any of that, disclosing medical information. And so it seems to take a life of its own wherever it's coming from, social media or whatever, and it's, I just find it unwarranted. I support fully what you're recommending. The one thing I like that there is choice. If we mandate masks, then we're not giving those that don't want a mask a choice. I fully empathize with those that are, that are struggling, that want masks. I love hearing the perspective. I applaud those who were for masks that had the courage to come and speak, even though speakers before them were heckled to Susan's point, and that just is really kind of uncalled for. And I've mentioned several times in the past, if people would get a lot further in their communication with us, if they're respectful, when people are personally attacking us for not being leaders, not being courageous, kind of the rest of their email loses a little bit of validity. So I would just encourage people to be respectful not only of us as officials, but of other people in the community, because it's only right. I agree with also what Susan said about the personal opinion. Of course, my personal opinion influences kind of what I think, but I do try to step back and think about all 12,000 students and 2,000 plus staff. Even though we don't address comments, masks at meetings, we've been wearing masks at meetings all along, and for months, we're more than 6 feet apart. We weren't required to wear masks at those meetings, but we were demonstrating the behavior that we were expecting. So, I think those comments are also a little bit off base. And I do also support whatever we decide to do on testing. I kind of do think more elementary, but especially if there's funding, then there's no harm. Especially if it helps us control any potential outbreaks even at the middle school and high school level. And I do support the vaccine and kind of pushing the vaccine. I respect people's choice not to be vaccinated. I understand the risks, and there's, experimental, but it obviously works. I mean, there's no coincidence in that steep drop in the chart you showed is a result of the vaccine. So, people can disagree and choose not to get vaccinated, but I do think we should continue to encourage that. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Would you like to go next? I have a couple questions. So, Jeff, when you said that you learned today that the costs for optional testing will be covered by the state or federal monies, does that include Title III and Title IV schools?
Yes.
Okay. Because previously it was only Title I and Title II.
Previously it was tied to different tiered schools within the funding model, so it was free to Tier 1 and 2. What came out today was that it is free for all Tier 1, 2, 3, and 4 schools. So previously there was a nominal cost to Tier 3 and 4 districts for a Tier 3 school, and the adequacy model, it is now waived for all schools.
Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure. And then to move away from the masks for just 1 minute, how will things like gym lockers, how will that look for kids this year? So the previous year, kids were not changing for gym class, PE class. They were not using the lockers in the middle school or high school. Will that resume?
Yeah, we anticipate using lockers certainly at middle school. I'll tell you, even if we make lockers available at the high school, there aren't a lot of students that actually use a locker, save perhaps small portions of the school year, but we would absolutely go back to using them. We do anticipate, in fact, if you have a middle and high school, you've probably seen information about PE uniform again, so we absolutely anticipate students changing for gym again and resuming those activities.
Okay, and then I just want a couple of follow-up comments. Brad, I appreciate your recommendation to use the language from the CDC, and I agree with that, except that I want to make sure that in district communications to parents that it's clear that we're not mandating based on vaccination status. Like, I just want to be clear. I feel there's some ambiguity with should and recommended. Like, just have it be clear that, so use the language, but also make sure that it's clear.
Sure.
And there's something, as far as collecting vaccination data, not so sure. Is that something we intend to pursue?
Well, we've not been collecting, nor I think is there any language in the document that speaks to any kind of mandatory requirement for that. So what I will tell you is that I believe we have perhaps the ability to aggregate data more specific to zip codes, but we would not have it tied to an individual student name. So I think any possibility to aggregate data would simply be a matter of aggregating within a particular geocode area, would not be a matter of, Mrs. Bladner, please tell us the vaccination status of your kids. We don't intend to do that. Again, it will impact contact tracing, quarantine pieces right now, but again, that is a conversation that would take place in that individual circumstance with a family as of right now if we deem that to be necessary.
Okay, thank you. So last fall, the district in August was on a plan to start school in a certain way, and then at the last minute, I think perhaps the day before, the day after the board meeting, guidance came that changed things. So when you say that they're going to update the FAQs, will that update, will we still maintain local control, do you anticipate?
Yeah, we will, and again, I guess I want to be really clear, the recommendation tonight and the decision that we've recommended tonight, I have continued to see repeatedly that there is autonomy for a local control decision around that tied to specific analysis of information as we did tonight. So I don't anticipate this recommendation changing based on guidance or based on any kind of clarification for guidance. I think as we mentioned, if anything changes, it changes as a result of known recognized conditions that might change that would suggest we need to have a conversation about adjusting that. But I don't anticipate, to your point, I don't anticipate another situation where an FAQ comes out at the last minute that adjusts everything. And the last part that I guess I'll mention tied to that is, as we've recognized at many points through last year, where we were a year ago is a markedly different place than where we are right now in terms of what we know and understand. And so there were a lot of things that were absolutely unclear a year ago. Last summer, as we were evaluating plans and conditions, there was a whole lot that wasn't known because it just literally wasn't known. And so as information became known, I think there were some new processes put in place and then clarified through the FAQs, and I just don't think we're in that same spot this year as we were a year ago.
Okay. Do we intend to quantify what changes could cause a return to masking mitigation?
Yeah, fair question. Respectfully, we didn't do that last year. We never quantified a specific circumstance that said we're automatically going remote. So when we made that decision early on, we made it through our own interpretation of what it was that we were seeing. But I guess to the point, we never said, like, this is the threshold, and absolutely if it's this many cases, right, we're pivoting to remote. And I would not be inclined to do that again this year, because I think what you're going to see and what we recognized is that there's a combination of circumstances that ultimately lead us to the assessment of where we are. I get very hesitant when we lock into like a single metric at a certain level, because I think there are other factors that can also be impacted by that. The most critical data as school starts is going to be what is the experience we're seeing with our students, right? That became for us through last year the most relevant data point was what are we seeing in our schools and what are we seeing in terms of potential transmission as a result of anything that we're doing inside of our schools, and I don't see that changing this year.
Good. I just want to be clear that, we've heard from a lot of different community members, and I don't want there to be a section of our community that feels that they're not being heard. I hope that if there are families who don't feel safe with the change in mask mitigation, that they can reach out to the district, have conversations, try to work with how we can help them feel safe. I hope that continues to be ongoing. I fully support giving parents the choice. I thank you and appreciate your advocacy with the health department and working closely with them. I just want to, I don't know if there's any students left here, but I agree with Susan. We need to strongly encourage our kids, not to judge their friends. Don't say anything if they have a mask on. Don't say anything if they don't. Just be accepting and enjoy this year. Let's get back to normal. But don't pressure. And know that even though we have seen a lot of passion, we've seen parents really step up and advocate for their kids, which is amazing. That we don't have to agree. It's okay. I think I talked to both of you before that one of the nice things that was said during the graduations this past spring by one of our English teachers was, and I said, I feel like this should be our motto as a district. It's okay to disagree. Just because, I think he said, just because someone disagrees with you doesn't mean they hate you. It's okay to listen and to try to work together, and I want our students to hear that, and I want them, because they're hearing everything from all sides, but just let people have the choice and do what they choose to do without any peer pressure or heckling or any of that. So I appreciate the emails, and I really want to encourage anyone who still feels uncomfortable to reach out to Japan administration, and I really do think that they will work with you to make you feel comfortable sending your kids.
Who else would like to share? Right? Sure. Just a few comments. Thank you for the presentation as well. One thing that I think is important, especially in what can be, of course, divisive issues in the community, is trying to move away from binary ways of thinking, like mask or no mask, and that's what I appreciate about this. Layers of mitigation strategy that you've recommended here. And the way I understand that is mask is one, of course, important piece of that, but that's in understanding that these other layers of mitigation would be put in place. So one comment I just wanted to add is that as we move into the year and watch the numbers very carefully, whether instead of thinking a binary of masked or no mask, maybe there'll be some opportunities at the classroom level to say this is a learning opportunity that's highly impactful, that requires less than 3 feet of social distancing, and maybe everybody can be required to put a mask on for that activity and then take it off or something like that. Maybe that can be considered as the year unfolds and whether the data would support that. In addition to the idea of moving away from binary thinking around masks or no masks, is if we see any numbers rise, consider those numbers at the very local level, and the possibility of saying maybe at a particular school site, masks may need to be required for a short period of time, or maybe rather than saying elementary all the way to high school, just really paying attention to where those, what the data shows us, and sort of move away from all or nothing sort of models, which I think your presentation seemed to indicate. And I did want to also follow up on what Angela shared. I think it's really important to recognize that all children in our community should feel safe going to school. And if this decision to not require masks cause any child to feel unsafe going to school, I would strongly recommend that the administration, and I trust this will be the case, work with those families to ensure that their children have access to a safe and secure learning environment as they understand safety to be for their particular conditions. And of course, I also want to support Susan and Angela in the comments that were made that children, of course, model the behavior of the adults in our community, and we would want to ensure that, although that wasn't particularly on display this evening, that we would respect people who have opinions that differ from our own. And of course, as adults, we need to be modeling that. It's okay to have different opinions, but and I actually don't have particular concerns with strong opinions coming toward the board, because we are elected by the community, and that's something we signed up for. But to be willing to treat our community members poorly is something that children will pick up from, and so the school administrators, I urge us to continue to hold a very high level of respect and dignity for our students in our district. Beth, do you want to say anything?
I strongly support the plan that was put forth, and I appreciate the effort, focus, and diligence and empathy that went into that report. I won't echo what my fellow board members have said, because I'm kind of sad on what I saw tonight. But I'm going to focus on positive. I love that we're engaged. We have so many board meetings where nobody comes, right? So it's positive that our community and our students are engaged, which what makes it so great. And I want that positive focus to move forward as well. Again, I'm just sad on what I saw tonight, but I think there's so much positive about Wheaton, Warrenville, Carroll Stream, Winfield. I love being part of this community, and I'm just so encouraged people are engaged and students are engaged. When we visit schools, we just see kids loving each other. We see kids playing, connected. All that is just so important, and that's the fundamental basis of this presentation we saw. I was getting them back to that, so I really appreciate that. And just thank you for the diversity of opinion and the feedback. That's very positive as well, so thanks for the time.
It's nice to be able to go last. For those of you who knew me as a PTA president, I never used a gavel once, and so using it tonight all those times was really out of character for me. I just want to share a couple of things in terms of how I got to the point of where I am 100% behind this. I looked up the word should a lot this weekend in a lot of places to see what it meant. Because that was a key piece in my thinking, in why I shifted, in what should meant versus required. I am all for elementary optional testing, so I would really like to see that in place. Another big piece that flipped for me that we haven't really talked about tonight was what would the logistics look like for our staff if we were using masks for those who are unvaccinated. And I think of myself having been a teacher and what that would have looked like for our staff and our teachers and having them try to police something like that. And I just didn't see that. I don't see that as something that I would want our teachers to do. I appreciate that we are willing to do this. The other piece that pushed me as well on 7/13, when ISBE put out, and I just feel it's important to put this out there for those that don't know, ISBE in their newsletter said the current guidance for Illinois schools is that you should work with local public health officials to determine the prevention strategies needed in your area by monitoring levels of community transmission and local vaccine coverage and by using screening testing to detect cases in K-12 schools. If school administrators decide to remove any prevention strategies based on local conditions, you should remove them one at a time and monitor closely with adequate testing through the school and or community for any increases. That was another big factor for me that pushed this, for me to be able to stand behind this tonight. So ISBE is saying this, and ISBE is the one that's saying we're following guidance, and this is there, as of yesterday, what they came out with. So thank you, Dr. Schuler and staff, for getting us to this point, for us to be able to, for our students, have one more step toward normalcy. Okay. All right.
So just be super clear, I mean, I think I heard universal consensus around that, just make absolutely certain, so we will communicate consistent with the second to last slide there in terms of the mitigations, what was on there. So masks will not be mandated in the fall, and that's true across the system.
Thank you for the community for listening so patiently and allowing us to have that opportunity to share our thoughts. All right, the next up is the 2021-2022 Community Engagement Plan.
Erica's coming up to the podium. This is an annual conversation that we have had with the board at this point in the year, each year, where we focus with the board on some of our priorities around community engagement and some of our priorities around opportunities. So I will say this ties to the third of your oral reports tonight, and that's the portrait of a graduate, and that you're going to see some references to portrait of a graduate in here. So, Erica, go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Schuler. I'm just going to preface this. Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity. A couple of the slides that I'm going to have in my slide deck, we did have earlier this spring when we were talking about our planning efforts for this coming year, but we have 2 board members on, so I wanted to make sure that we captured some of those slides. So just as a reminder, as part of your Vision 2022 strategic plan, one of your 4 quadrants is a commitment to community engagement. And annually I do this, but I have to. Not every Board of Education prioritizes community engagement, and it's, I think, very evident tonight by the levels of participation that it is a priority to this board. And so this is your commitment that is on Vision 2022 plan. These are your areas of focus. Typically what I've shared with you is what we've fondly known as the placemat. And under each one of those columns, we highlight activities and events and tactics in each one of those areas to meet those various areas of focus. So just a quick recap of what did last year's community engagement efforts look like. This is probably one of my most favorite pictures from the past school year. We kicked off our school year by cutting the ribbon on a brand new Jefferson Early Childhood Center. Unfortunately, we were only able to do that virtually, but we're still able to engage the community in that. And hopefully later this fall, we'll be able to do something more in person where we show off our brand new, beautiful building and allow the community to come in and see where their investment is going. A lot of our efforts this year around community engagement surrounded this image. We as a board and administrative team very much appreciate being proactive in our community engagement efforts, and this year we were often reactive in a lot of that. And so this is really where the bulk of our community engagement efforts were, and communicating with our community what are our mitigation strategies, what will school look like, what does school look like, and giving the community that lens into our schools that they were not able to see firsthand. And so a couple of other images that I'd love to share are really tied to our other various community engagement efforts. So this year we were in a unique position where a lot of our efforts were surrounding helping families meet basic needs. And that's something that we always do, but we saw that on such a heightened scale this year. And so we really want to thank the Student Excellence Foundation for establishing the Essential Needs Fund, which started off as the Food Insecurity Crisis Fund and morphed into the Essential Needs Fund for students and families in crisis. I'm happy to share that that partnership continues to blossom. We went with the foundation to visit one of our summer programs this afternoon where they're supporting resource bags for 85 students in that program. We are piloting a weekend backpack food program in addition to mobile food pantries, and the staff at Jefferson, where the program is housed right now, couldn't have been more complimentary about the backpack food program over the weekend. And that's something that we are going to look to expand to several of our elementary schools next school year. We help families out with technology needs, access to internet, and we really did that using that bottom right image, our key communicator network. And so one of the communication strategies that we found extremely effective from the very start of the pandemic was bringing together a group of key communicators, and I'm going to get to that a little bit more in the end, but we saw that as an invaluable resource, as something we want to push on a more regular basis and keeping that group engaged. We really utilized our great data. Julie O is our data queen, as you all know, so that we can have a laser-focused understanding of who needed what, where our students were at, where our families were at, so that we could get them the supports they need. But then we also supported our families this year too in their
their social and emotional needs through hosting several parent workshops via Zoom. Like it or not, always, social media continues to be one of our most powerful communication channels. I shared just a couple of posts with you here on the screen, mainly to point out to you, if you look at that pop-up market post, that post reached over 10,000 people in the time that it was active. That post about Mark Anderson from Wheaton North retiring just this year, that was posted in June, reached 6,288 people, but 1,403 people took the time to engage on that post. They hit the like button, they commented. That is a very high engagement. You see the other posts, the kids always help us get really far-reaching posts. The one far on the right was when we got to dig a tree with the city of Wheaton in honor of Arbor Day, some Veterans Day activities. But again, I just share these with you. There's some analytics from our Twitter, just how social media allows us to get our message, allows us to reach so many people in our community, to give them that front row seat and lens into our classrooms. This year we also completed a facilities overview document that you saw, I believe, at your last board meeting. We are finalizing a very similar finance overview document, as well as revamping our district profile. All three documents looking very similar. Once those are finalized, our sections of our website will be updated to look like this as well. We've got some work to do on our facilities section of our website to update that. So before we move on to kind of what does our next year's plan look like, are there any questions that I can answer from board members? So, both at the suggestion of the Community Engagement Committee and then bringing it to the full board for feedback, we condensed the placemat down to one 8.5 by 11 back-to-back sheet, and that is located in your green folders. And then, David, could you pull that up? You have up here. Okay, while we're getting that pulled up for the community to see, you do have a copy of it in your green folders. So this one-page plan, really the top of it I reviewed is your commitment statement to community engagement and then also your focus areas. What we wanted to capture on the front of this was, I think, what was so great about that placemat is it reflected all of the great things and incredible ways that we're engaging our community in our schools. And we didn't want to lose sight of that, but we also knew we needed to condense this. So we tried to capture on the front of this some of the key aspects of that plan so that those didn't get lost. But just because we condensed the plan doesn't mean we're necessarily stopping any of those practices. So we will still have our Citizens Advisory Committee meetings, our chat with the boards, parent engagement through educational opportunities, developing a community calendar, using social media, our annual leadership breakfast, elected leader breakfast. So all of those things will still take place, but a couple of new engagement activities that I highlighted on the plan. We are in a really, really good position to engage our community in two key areas this year, which is starting off this fall with our portrait of graduate work, and then ultimately allowing that to drive our strategic planning efforts. So as you can see, I'm like you too, I'm very excited to see all of the active community participation we've seen over this last year, and I think we are in a very exciting and unique position to capitalize and take advantage of that passion for our schools and invite those community members to be a part of a conversation of the future of this school district, which is ultimately our portrait of a graduate work that leads into our strategic planning efforts. So we did add 2 new work groups to our engagement plans. That is the Portrait of a Graduate work group, which will be its own steering committee, as well as a strategic plan work group that will then take that Portrait of a Graduate and then I'll walk through 2 engagement opportunities that we're proposing. the Board of Education, you have decided that you are going to develop student groups, that you can make sure that we're not only just engaging the parent voice, staff voice in those strategic conversations, but that also you're making sure that we have our student group, students represented in there. One thing I mentioned too is that we started, although maybe somewhat irregular, was Zoom meetings with our key community partners. Those include representatives from all of our park districts, our libraries, Outreach Community Center in Carroll Stream, Warrenville Youth and Family Services in Warrenville, World Relief, People's Resource Center, Marion Park. We are open to expanding that group. But we meet, and it's not just about what's going on in the schools. We each take our turns to report back with each other. What's the latest and greatest, what's going on, and how can we each support each other's efforts? And so that is something that all of us collectively have said, this is something we absolutely have to continue. And so we are looking to do that at least on a quarterly basis, if not more frequently. So very, very excited about that. It's built and enhanced some really great new friendships and relationships. So I want to turn our attention to the back side of the document. We decided previously we kind of broke the placemat out by quarter and really wanted to focus on what are some of kind of our monthly areas of focus for the months of the school year. And so this month we are going to, Dr. O'Keefe is going to be presenting our budget and then sharing obviously tonight our draft of our community engagement plan. I should have said that from the start, but this is a draft, and we'll certainly open this up to board feedback and suggestions once we're done here for anything maybe we're missing on this. And so when I say those are our areas of focus and engagement, that's where largely our written and our social media communications will take place, and or possibly a two-way engagement opportunity with our community. In August, we will focus our efforts around facilities, the facilities work that's taken place this summer. We have done several social media posts about the work going on. The video of the chiller getting dropped on top of Wheaton North seemed to be quite a hit. That was pretty fun to watch. Apparently they weigh 12,000 pounds, I learned, and I should have been doing it. So that was a fun opportunity. We are going to look to do a print meeting to the community in August with an invitation to participate in a September community engagement session. And so I'm going to fast forward to September, and one of the opportunities that we are proposing is utilizing our September Committee of the Whole board meeting to give the community and board an overview of our portrait of a graduate work, and then re-engage our community in some tabletop listening sessions and discussions. So some of you will recall I participated in Engage 200 back in 2013, 2014, and we would like to have some table-led discussions, board members able to listen in on those table discussions. And so that August mailing will include kind of an update on what's to come for the school year, but also with an invitation to come to that event hosted here, hopefully with some tables set up and some more discussion and feedback opportunities from the community. In October, we will focus our efforts around student learning, career pathways. We'll hear an update about innovation and technology, and we'll target October for a parent education and engagement opportunity. You'll notice that in September and October, and then fast forward to, I'll get to January, February, one of the things that Dr. Salagi and I have talked about for the last couple of years is that we've noticed that as we've rolled out engagement opportunities for our community, that September, October, and then January, February, those time frames are really prime for community participation, just given the time of year. And so we want to definitely take advantage of those time windows to engage our community in two-way in a dialogue, but then also use that time frame for parent education and engagement. And what those exact opportunities look like are yet to be determined. We also talked about how can we continue to offer our parents education opportunities, but rather than quantity, look for really quality, robust opportunities, and maybe we don't do 5 or 6 a year, but really focus on 2 really great, engaging topics that are of interest to families. In November, we will focus around the levy, school calendar posting, and then we always, around the Thanksgiving holiday, make sure that we push out a message of gratitude for our entire school community. I am going to just kind of start to, just in the interest of time, if that's okay, kind of move along because this was posted the agenda ahead of time for you to read. I do want to call attention to December. We will come back to the board and focus our communications efforts around a portrait of a graduate work, and then that will lead us into our January board meeting where we would again like to utilize that January 26th committee of the whole meeting as an opportunity to kind of share out where did we land with our portrait of a graduate work and how can we use that to drive our next strategic plan and use that as an opportunity to engage our community in dialogue, table settings, and allow the board to listen and hear that feedback from the community. And then in June, I'll fast forward again down to June where we would like to do an end of year print mailing to our community, just recapping how the school year went, and then also candidly where we landed with our portrait of a graduate work and our strategic plan as well. Questions?
Feedback. I have a question. Could you, and I don't know actually if this is, and I feel kind of silly because I don't remember it, the Board of Education student groups. What is the makeup of that and how will that work?
Yeah, we're working on that, so it's going to come to our August meeting. So just a quick recap for the board. You, in previous school years, you had dedicated 2 of your chat with the board sessions to the high schools. So you did one at Wheaton, Warrenville South, one at Wheaton North, and so it was a combination of an opportunity to engage with some students, but also was a community meeting, and it just was a little awkward in terms of, I think, your ability to really engage with, talk to, hear from kids that I think you've heard that reference a couple of times tonight are really important stakeholders for you, obviously, as you make decisions. And so what we're intending to do next year is kind of revamp engagement into something that more reflects kind of your teacher group opportunity or opportunity to engage with staff and actually have a group of students representing both high schools that each board member would have an opportunity to meet with multiple times over the course of the year to get feedback from them, share ideas, share, some of the topics that the board is working on to make sure you have that student voice represented. So you actually have there's a student that graduated a few years back from Wheaton North, was actually a graduation speaker, I think, came and talked to the board a couple of times by the name of Salam Kasey. Salam has actually been in the summer doing some kind of internship shadowing experiences as she's soon to be a graduate of the University of Illinois and is working on a master's degree in kind of school policy, and so she's actually helping us with a couple of projects, but one of them is that, kind of helping me put together what can that student experience look like, especially coming from the perspective of a recent graduate.
Okay, thank you.
Anyway, more to come. That was maybe more than you needed, but that's kind of the context.
When Erica said that it's something that we've done, I was like, I don't remember that.
We've referenced it a couple of times that it's to come, but have not gone deeply into the format of the structure.
Okay, no, I think it's fantastic, so I think that's great. And just a couple of quick comments. I really like the idea of trying to use the community of the whole to do a community engagement session. I went to all of those sessions in 2013 and 14, and I thought they were very useful, and frankly partly ended up with me sitting here, but I think that's a great way to try to engage the community again. And there was one other thing. I don't remember, but anyway, I think it looks great, and I think that I like the new opportunities and I look forward to seeing how we can execute all this.
Anybody else? Questions for Erica?
Just three very quick ones. Thank you, Erica, for the presentation. Under the regular meetings checkpoints, I wonder whether the district would consider, I know the Outreach Community Center and other organizations work with populations of students of color in a variety of ways, but the possibility of expanding a partner, for example, the historic NAACP or other organizations that have committees that are specifically focused on strengthening educational opportunities for students of color. Just a consideration. I also wonder whether the Wheaton Warrenville police could be added to this list, recognizing the data that indicates the school-to-prison pipeline continues to be a persistent problem with certain students in our community, maybe strengthening partnerships and relationships there. And then lastly, whether, knowing that our restorative justice focus is occurring in our schools, whether there be opportunities to extend those invitations to parents so that there's a holistic family approach when issues come up, that there's an invitation for students to engage in restorative practices in the schools. The families are aware of the benefits and how it works, and bridge those divides between what students are engaging in school and what the parents understand restorative practices to be.
Anybody else? Questions for Erica? Comments?
Just one quick question. This has been something that I've been involved in, I think, since my first meeting on the board. I was heavily involved in Engage 200. I think the evolution of this plan has been fantastic, and I fully embrace, as we talked about the Community Engagement Committee at the end of last year, trying to consolidate and focus. So I think this overall plan is really good. I would love to be month by month. The only thing, maybe a suggestion, I don't know if it's even possible to implement, but as we're looking at the portrait of graduate work as well as the strategic plan, another maybe potential group might be some of the larger employers that are based in our community. I know we have the Chamber of Commerce, but maybe we can pick off 2 or 3 of the more significant employers within our district and engage the leadership of those groups. I think that could be really informative in both our portrait of a graduate as well as our strategic plan. So maybe just another list of entity down there to consider reaching out to. And as I say that, it might be interesting to engage with the Student Excellence Foundation in doing that. I don't know what that would look like, but that's an idea.
Thank you.
But good job. Let's move forward.
Anybody else? Thank you, Erica. Appreciate it. Okay, we have our last oral report, District 200, Portrait of a Graduate.
So we've talked a couple of times about Portrait of a Graduate. Dr. Slag is going to walk you quickly through the process that we've identified to circle back to Portrait of a Graduate. And I want to be clear that while the board will obviously have an opportunity to engage in some of the content of Portrait of a Graduate, this is really more focused tonight on our process for ultimately anticipating bringing back a draft to you as a board. So, Chris, go ahead. Thank you, Dr. Schuler, and good evening, members of the Board of Education. Thanks for the opportunity to talk a little bit about Portrait of a Graduate and, again, our process and timeline, and to obviously hear any feedback, input, or questions as well. Slide you've seen often, but I think it's important that we put this in front of us as we reinvigorate or bring back the development of Portrait of a Graduate is why do so, and really 4 key points to that. That the portrait expresses our school community's aspirations for all kids, while prioritizing really the essential skills and qualities, and uniquely it puts the student at the heart of the work. And as we transition into strategic planning, the portrait can serve really as a focal point for that strategic action planning. And also it's important to mention as we talk about Portrait of a Graduate, as I speak about process, ultimately what you see is crossover amongst a lot of our departments. Community engagement, as we work with all different pieces, members of SLT and our entire school and community are part of the Portrait of a Graduate. Again, a refresher on what's being done to start developing that district portrait. Dating all the way back to June 2019 is when we started our community feedback and input process, and that's where we really started asking our school community groups, all of our members, what are the essential competencies and characteristics that we want from a District 200 graduate, and we received a lot of feedback from that, not only orally, but through the thought exchange process. We also developed a Portrait of a Graduate steering team that met once and was ready to meet a second time, but unfortunately that was cut short due to the March pandemic of March 2020. However, out of that work, we were able to analyze community input derive themes and competencies. But we know a lot of time has gone by since that happened. While that data is very valuable data and important and will certainly be a part of our process as we move forward, we want to talk a little bit about what are the next steps in developing our portrait. Really, two things stand out. Overarching is that we need to seek further input in order to not only prioritize the current competencies, but prioritize and further define them and or potentially change them. Again, time has gone by, so as we think about those pieces, we know that between now and November, December, we want to gather more input. So, while we know we need to do that, who do we need to engage and seek that further input from? We heard a little bit about a portrait of a graduate work team or steering team. We had one in place previously. We want to reinstall that, and some of the previous members obviously will still be a part of our work, but we want to broaden that scope. We want to make sure that we are reconnecting and or connecting with members that fully represent our school community, from the workforce to our parents, to our local colleges, all the different pieces, our teachers, students, and current graduates. We want to make sure that we seek input from all those pieces. We also want to make sure that we install an internal stakeholder review, so tapping on the expertise of our department chairs, our coaches, members of the fine arts, and our leaders in the district will also be a part of our work. Process-wise, you can see kind of a timeline that we've outlined here, and this is on your left side as well. August is really the time when we will be reestablishing that steering team, also contacting members to be a part of that work, and reconnecting with them and bringing them in line with the work that's been done. And while that's been said, we want that team to also be a part of the leadership work that could happen at that September 22nd community engagement event, right? So while the details of that are in process, we see that steering team playing a pivotal role in that work. Between September 23rd and October 15th, we see as a key window to get school community input from a wide range of stakeholders, not only internally but externally, on the themes that have emerged, but also on new input that could come. We see that most likely being through thought exchange, but it could also happen through other venues and through input that we receive through that community engagement opportunity. The other pieces you can see through here go through the key internal stakeholder review. We hope we plan to bring a draft of the portrait to the steering team in mid-November, and to the Board of Education, to you all on December 8th, to then be used as the focal point for planning our strategic plan. So I know I went through that quickly. I wanted to give you an overview of process.
And just one quick thing I wanted to mention as well. So it was, I think, mentioned earlier this evening, it was a part of your consent agenda tonight. For CAC this year, and we see this as an opportunity to engage some that we weren't able to accommodate through CAC. The reality was we just didn't have the space for everybody on CAC, and so I think this provides another avenue for us to reach out to those that were interested, because we want to capitalize on that interest and engagement, and perhaps bring them into the portrait of a graduate and strategic plan work.
Any questions or comments for Dr. Slally?
I have one question. So the school community input, the survey opportunity, is that more just to see if we're still in the same place with these 11 initial themes, or are we looking for new information that, and like, I don't want to say starting over, but like, you know what I mean? Is it?
I think it will be. I think it's a really good question. I think it will be a combination of both. I think it will be in order to help us prioritize, because 11 is a pretty broad, is a pretty large number to begin with, but then and or add additional. So I anticipate a new thought exchange question that gives context to what we have, but then also offers an opportunity for new input and also prioritization of some of the other things. So ultimately, I see that as one data source in addition to the input we get at some of our strategic events. So I think it's going to be both.
Okay. Anybody else? Questions? Comments?
Just one kind of quick comment. I was part of this back at however long ago it was, and it was a great process, a lot of engagement from a lot of people. I'm really excited about this continuing and getting over the finish line, because I think it really sets the stage for a lot of future actions and work plans of the district. When you think about how it might inform our strategic plan in terms of curriculum development or additions to curriculum or revisions to curriculum, what kind of programs we might want to offer, what kind of partnerships we might want to engage in, especially as it relates to the potential career pathways program. So there's a lot of offshoots of this that really set the direction for our district for the next long period of time, 5+ years. And so this is critical, and I think it's good that we're really putting an emphasis on this because it needs to get finished, and I think it's going to be very informative for us as a board.
Anything else? Thank you, Dr. Slaggy.
Thank you.
Next up, we're back to action items. The first is approval to post the tentative budget and set the public hearing of the fiscal year 2022 budget. Dr. Schuler, any information?
So I just want to introduce Dr. Brian O'Keefe, who is going to be presenting his first budget to the Board of Education. Mr. Farley has presented budgets for a number of years within the district, and so another quick piece of context, we met with the Finance Committee, probably over a week ago, to really review the process for getting to development of this budget. Important to recognize that while Dr. O'Keefe is presenting this tonight, it was certainly developed both with his team from the business office and Mr. Farley, who was instrumental in shepherding the first part of this, but without spoiling the surprise, important thing to know is we're presenting to you a balanced budget. Again, within the district, which is a requirement by the board, so happy to give you a little bit of an overview and recognize that you're not approving the budget tonight. All you're approving is the posting of the tentative budget, and you will have time to continue to study and ask questions about this. So, Dr. O'Keefe.
Dr. Schuler, thank you. Excellent job. That concludes the presentation of the budget. We've hit all the high and key points, so thank you. I want to start by certainly say thank you. I appreciate being in front of you, and it's a pleasure. There's nothing like the pressure of presenting a $200 million budget on the 9th day while doing your job. And we took the heart, and we're following a very similar path that Mr. Farley used in the end. If there are questions specific to the budget, he's already waiting on the other end of the line in Arizona, and we'll be happy to answer, take questions regarding this. But the budget calendar itself and what we do from a budget perspective, it's a 9-month process. And a lot of folks may not understand that. And part of that is from a statutory perspective. The other part is just purely from the time necessary to build a document of this size. So we start in January, when we ask you to give us approval to begin the process for the next year's fiscal budget. We talk about the budget forecast near the end of January, and then really that's where we start diving in deep. So we talk to our departments, we talk to our buildings, and begin pulling together data and aggregating it to have a better understanding of what their needs are going to be for next year and how it might look for next year compared to the current year that we're in. This year was a little different. We came back to you in May to talk about all the federal funding updates. There's lots of ESSER money that has been released and made available, so it was key to share with the Board of Education what that meant from a district perspective and give you some guidance on where the thought process was in terms of how we were going to support students in spending their money. As Dr. Schuler mentioned, just last week we met with the Finance Committee as a grounding or a basis for tonight. Tonight, again, we're not approving the budget. We're asking you for the approval to post the budget. Statutorily, we're required to post the budget for 30 days, receive public comment. We'll hold a budget hearing at the August 18th meeting, very similar to how we started our meeting tonight. So if there is any public comment, the public has the ability to do so, and then we'll ask you to approve the final budget in September. Between now and then, we'll have roughly 6.5 or 7 weeks. We'll look at fine-tuning anything based on adjustments that are necessary or definitive information that we do get from the State Board of Education about revenues and other things, and come back with potentially a budget that has changed a bit, but I think the overall function and development of the budget will not look any different than it does tonight. One thing, too, that is a part of the statutory process, and we put it in the Daily Herald because it's the most recognizable paper in the area, is that we do post the posting specific to the budget hearing, which will occur, as I mentioned, last month. So just a few recaps for you on where things are at. 5-year history of overall operational revenues. And again, operational revenues are revenues that are associated with all of our funds except for debt service in our capital project fund. You can see in red the heavy portion of our revenues does come from locally, and that's from the taxpayer side of things. And it's not too different from an expenditure perspective when we look at the amount of money that goes out the door. Roughly 75 cents on every dollar is tied to salaries and benefits. We are a human capital organization when it comes to public education. Operating expenses per pupil, which is defined in the annual financial report. We are the second from the right, so that number specifically for fiscal year 20 is $13,407. So for the fiscal year 20 overall expenditures, on average, we spent $13,407 per student. This is not necessarily, I wouldn't look at this as an underwhelming or overwhelmingly good or bad. We're operationally sound and fiscally conservative, and we know that we make good decisions for kids at all times and spend the money that's necessary to support our student body. So while we may not be at the average or we may not be to the left, it's not an indication that we're not doing right things on behalf of kids. Fund balance history, and also something very important from a big picture perspective. The Board of Ed policy, which is policy 4.20, defines that fund balance should be in the range of 25 to 40% of total revenues. As you can see, fund balances have creeped up a bit over the past 5 years. This is not, we're just looking at some quick data today. Our fund balance as of fiscal year 20, which is not last year, it's the year before, was at 35%. So our overall ratio, it looks like the number is going to be very close to that same thing this year. From a cash basis perspective, as of June 30th, we're at almost 34%. But since our AFR is based on a modified accrual accounting basis, there's actually revenues and expenditures that happen in July and August that are specific to the previous fiscal year that the auditors pull back in and include. And when we look at those numbers, we're probably going to be running around that 35% threshold again. Just some highlights on the revenue side of the budget. Part of our budget is based on CPI, and that's the Consumer Price Index. That's always the prior December. So the levy that we will bring to you in a few months, our 2021 levy, is based on CPI from past December. That's 1.4%, and that's what we have built into the budget. One area of note that certainly will be a discussion for us in the future, and maybe it may happen in June when we're talking about, January when we're talking about financial projections. CPI for June was just released a few days ago, and the 12 months trailing CPI as of June 30th this year is 5.4%. That's a number that's beyond the statutory allowance for school districts in tax-capped areas. So normally, as the year progresses, CPI kind of dwindles and then settles down. And even at that case, we very well could be looking at a CPI around 4% at year-end. I'm not predicting it. I'm not saying that's what it's going to be, but we may have more of a challenge this year just based on inflation over the past 4 months. Specifically, we're 0.6, 0.8, 0.6, and 0.9 over the last 4 months in terms of inflation. We'll see how that progresses the rest of the year.
Brian, just to clarify that number, that would inform what our levy would be at the end of 2022.
Correct. That would be practice in our 2022 levy. It does not mean we're required from a statutory perspective to increase the levy based on CPI, but we are limited from a tax perspective in terms of our caps at 5%. That's built into PTEL. Tax distributions, in many counties throughout the state, folks have had the opportunity to submit taxes a little bit later than normal, 2-month windows in many places. So we did have a strong collection in our first collection in June, but we also have $5 million plus that just came in last week too as a collection. So we're at a 53% collection rate right now for tax levy 2020. CPPRT, which is corporate personal property replacement taxes. This is something that was stopped in 1979. It's taxes based on property within corporations. We do receive money consistently now. It's a separate line item, and that line item is actually almost $2 million for us from an estimate perspective.
Interest earnings, and we actually spread that CPPRT out. The majority goes into the education fund with a small portion going on IMRF and Social Security. Interest earnings, since the pandemic has started, zero is too low, but it's close to zero. So our interest earnings for all of last fiscal year was $97,000. That's it. Our budget for this year is $95,000, and I don't see anytime soon any significant changes in interest earnings. And I'm not going to project that I think they're going to be better. I think we're probably going to be in a very similar place even a year from now. State funding, so a good chunk of our budget comes from state funding. The old general state aid is now the evidence-based funding model. We've been held harmless here for 2 years, and then just a few months ago, the governor announced an intent to continue investing in public education, so there will be another $300 million invested into public education as a whole. That equates to about $300,000 for us, and that's built into the model here. And then we'll also take that evidence-based funding and move it out into different funds, like Ed Fund. The majority of it goes to the Ed Fund, O&M Fund. We pay for our certificates on Jefferson ECC using the evidence-based funding model, and then also transportation. And then another huge piece, we call them MCATs, so mandated categoricals. That's transportation, both regular and special ed, and then driver ed and special education tuition reimbursement. Those typically come in 4 payments this year, 4 payments per year. They're not always 4 payments from the same fiscal year. In fact, the 4th payment that was issued or vouchered in June was just paid last week, and that's about $1.7 million for us. So we're actually, as of July 6th, caught up with what the state owes us from a mandated categorical perspective. And there are other big things too, especially on the federal funding side. You've heard about and seen numbers related to ESSER, those federal funding programs. We do have the National School Lunch Program, and it's important to point out that for this year, free lunch for all again. So that's in place through June 30th. So any revenues that we would see normally coming from families are dissipating, and those revenues are being offset from reimbursements from the USDA through our lunch program. So free lunch for all. Doesn't matter your status of reduced, paid, or free, and it doesn't matter what grade you're at or what school you're at. Free lunch for all throughout the U.S., all kids up through age 18, and then we'll also have the ability to offer those same services to those who may not be in person. That will certainly look different this year, because I think the super majority of our kids will be back, but we can also feed anybody in the community up to age 18 too. It's a nice tool to have to support those that are in need. And then you see some other just federal programs too, title. It's a specified program, IDEA, another specified program. We do get reimbursed for Medicaid, so that's us services that we're providing to students or families that are Medicaid-based. And then I mentioned the big picture when it comes to the ESSER federal grants. Just some quick recaps on where expenditures are at. Teachers' contract was a 2.5% increase. Moving into this budget year, a 3% increase for classified staff. Non-union administrators, we're giving a 1.8% increase. We do have in our upcoming plan year, so our benefit year for medical, dental, life insurance runs from September 1st through August 30th. There was a 6% increase across the board last year with the renewal. This year, the increase is just 3.6% on the PPO side, but a decrease of 4.6% on the HMO side. So it's a really strong renewal, especially in a tough year when it comes to a lot of expenditures. Started being pushed in the door last summer after people were able to get back into elective surgeries and other big things like that. And to give you an idea of where that split is, about 75% of our population who choose medical plans are in PPO, and 25% of our population are on the HMO side of things, just to give you a little perspective there. The TRS Fed, so this 10.31% is if we use federal grants to pay for teacher salaries. We'd have to pay, in terms of benefit costs, 10.31% of that to TRS. And then our costs for the IMRF pension side of things, so that's for classified staff, actually had a pretty significant reduction. So in calendar year, and IMRF is always based on calendar year. So in the current calendar year, we're paying a benefit to IMRF on behalf of our classified staff at 10.87%. For next calendar year, we don't have the final numbers yet, but these are the preliminary numbers. We're looking at almost a 2% decrease in those costs next year. Purchase services, supplies, capital flows, lots of big pictures. So the ESSER funds are really focusing on supporting students and adding math intervention positions and coaches funded through the grant. Certainly continuing to make sure that we have the right resources from a one-to-one perspective for all of our students. So that's repairing, under, and replacing, along with the copy refresh. This is phase 2, continuing on from what started last year. Our outsourced contracts, so food services with Organic Life. We meet with them next week to begin really in-depth planning for next year. All of our students will have the ability to eat in school, and ideally just based on spacing, all of our students will be able to eat in cafeterias. We're not quite there yet in understanding what that looks like and if it can be done based on the 3-foot expectations, but that's our goal, and that's the plan as of today. We do outsource our custodial. You actually just approved a new 5-year contract back in April with ADM organization, and then our transportation is through both Illinois Central and Sunrise. For the food service piece, we are heading into year 3 of that contract. That can be a 5-year contract, so it's 5 years of 1 year successive renewals, if you will. And the same thing on the transportation side. So transportation, whether it's regular general education or special education, it's a 3-year initial contract, and then we can have 2 1-year renewals. We will determine right around winter break if the services being provided by Illinois Central and Sunrise are meeting our expectations, and if they're not, we'll go out to bid. A few other pieces, obviously we're still continuing to focus on our consumption when it comes to utilities. We have a large portion of our student population, large portion in terms of dollars, not necessarily numbers, that are outplaced, and that's tuition that we pay for those specific needs based on the individualized education plans for those students. Student activity accounts are left in here because it's a new update from us, for us in the business office side of things, both in the AFR and the budget itself. So we're now required to report on the budget and on the AFR the total amount held as of June 30th in our student activity funds through all of our system. So that's a number that then the public sees in going. It's just another step to making sure there's clear and accurate transparency on what we have and what's being reported to the public. And then last but not least, I'll mention just the lease payment for the Early Childhood Center at Jefferson. That payment runs until 2038, but based on the lease, the structure of the certificates, that money must come out of local funds. It is not coming out of the debt. It's paid out of debt service, but it's not using taxes to pay it out of debt service. We use the evidence-based funding model to pay for that. Quick update on where we're at. We are on pace to be substantially completed with all of our work this summer on the HVAC side. Big singular focus, with Washington being the biggest school being impacted. I just walked the site again today. We're a little bit ahead of schedule at Washington, which is terrific. And I think our 2 final pieces, because we do have to bring in 2 more chillers. One will be one more at Wheaton North and one at Edison Middle School. But the contractor is telling us our expected substantial completion is still as of 7/31 today. Real quick highlights on where we're at in terms of some of our funds. About $154 million in the education fund and estimated revenues, with the vast majority of that coming from property taxes. That's consistent, nothing new from your perspective. Expenditures again in the ed fund, because it is the largest fund, and all salaries except for O&M come out of that fund. 84% of the planned expenditures in the ed fund are related to salaries and benefits. O&M is a little different, and you'll notice that there seems to be about a $7.2 million profit, and I'll explain why that's not the case, but we're estimating revenues of about $18.4 million, with more than 80% of that coming from local funds, i.e. property taxes, and then about $11.2 million in specifically purchases. What's different and has changed a few years ago, our auditors have told us any major capital projects they would expect to see being paid out of the capital project fund. So in this case, we have a variance in here that is the $7.2 million. For that money, which is also item number 2 under your action item tonight, is the resolution to move that money specifically from O&M to the Capital Projects Fund so that we can pay for the projects going on this summer. Debt service, bond and interest, so this is all of our general obligation bonds plus lease certificates. And this is always just a little bit and will continue to be for the next few years. So you see that the overall revenues are slightly less than the expenditures, and that's because when we have debt payments that are declining over time, as we do, and our final debt payment is it's on April 1st of 2025 for the general obligation bonds. We collect in a fiscal year. You're always working between 2 tax levy years. So money that is collected back in June for tax levy 20 is some money attributed from bond payments that we have to make on October 1st and November 1st, and then we also make payments on those bonds in April and May. So part of the collections each year are related to one tax levy year, part of the collections are related to another tax levy year, and we actually have some declining bond payments over the next few years. So we'll continue to see a little bit of a variance between revenues and expenditures. There's nothing wrong with that as a whole. It just means that we are getting closer to the point where the debt will be completely finished at that point, assuming no changes before that time. Transportation fund, about $10.2 million in revenues, with a little bit more than 50% of that being in property taxes. A big chunk of that is reimbursements from the state of Illinois, both for special education and our general education transportation. Expenditures, many of our expenditures are for pupil transportation. IMRF and Social Security, again, these are both obligations from the state perspective because we are an IMRF employer, and our obligations from a federal perspective. We just look at a net neutral from both the revenue and expenditure side for that. A couple of highlights about the funds. I already mentioned interest earnings are going to be significantly low. And also part of that $7.2 million transfer moving over from O&M includes $1.9 million that's been carved out of ESSER 2 to help pay for some of those projects this summer. Working cash, which is our piggy bank in essence, a much smaller amount of interest earnings. And then just some quick recaps about funds from source. So overall, so these are total revenues. About 83% of our revenues come locally, and then about 9% from state, and then the federal is about 7%, which is a bit higher than normal, but that's because of ESSER. A breakdown of the funds. Certainly, the vast majority of our funds come in from you, our taxpayers, and those that are part of our constituents. The operating funds, again, which is everything but debt service and capital projects. About $187 million is being planned, with more than $150 million locally. And very similar breakout, about 80% of those operating fund revenue expectations coming from property taxes. And then just overall expenditures. With a $208 million budget, about $162 million goes to the 2 biggest categories, so that's salaries and benefits in one, and then purchase services in another, and then certainly we have our debt payments down there at the bottom too. Overall expenditures by object, this is, and this includes the debt service, so excuse the numbers just a bit, but certainly the majority is salaries. And then from the operating side of things, which again does not include debt services or capital projects, the vast majority is out of salaries and benefits. And then that's where we look at, from the operating fund perspective, it's about 3/4 of every dollar that we spend goes to salaries and benefits. All funds, this looks like we actually have a deficit. We don't, because this does not include the $7.2 million that's being transferred. The state of Illinois, in its budget form, does not recognize transfers among funds as revenues, even though it recognizes the expenditures associated with that transfer. So while it looks like we may have a deficit of $946,000, actually we don't. You add back into $7.2 million and we have a balanced budget. And then just revenue by funds, the majority is in the educational fund. Expenditures, the majority in the educational fund, and then the overall operating budget if we strip out debt service and do not include that $7.2 million being transferred over. So it looks from an operating perspective like we have a significant surplus, We don't. When we back out that $7.2 million. And a quick little recap between last year and this year, we're looking at about a 3.5% increase in overall operating revenue and about a 2.5% increase in overall expenditures.
Any questions for Dr. O'Keefe?
What time is it? I see Brad has a smile on his face.
Congratulations.
This is either to have fun with me or...
No. I asked all my questions. Clarifications by email. There were just little nuances. We're just posting this for public review and comment tonight. So I'm comfortable with the whole thing. Just to kind of clarify, which was my last question in my email, was so we have an operating budget independent of the work we're putting in our buildings, and independent of our debt service payment.
Correct.
Of about $179 million. That's about 1% over what we're projecting to. That's the revenue is about $1.9 million more than what we're expecting to expend. Let me try to say that again. So our operating budget, our expenditures, about $179 million. We're taking in about 1.9 more than that. That's the ESSER 2 funding.
Correct.
Okay. So if anybody asks, we have a $179.7 million operating budget.
Right, and when you just take that 179, you add in the 7.2 that's being transferred from O&M over to capital projects, that's where we're almost at a dead-even balance budget.
Okay.
Slight surplus at this point.
I have no more questions.
This may go a little bit with what Brad was talking about. So the 1.9 million from ESSER 2, that's included in the 7.2 million transfer from the O&M fund.
Correct.
If we hadn't had ESSER 2, where would that 1.9 million have come from?
Well, actually, technically it's not included in the O&M fund right now. That money was put directly into the capital projects fund for ESSER. So we are transferring 7.2 million out, and the 1.9 helps to offset what we potentially would have had to move over. Getting to the point, we probably, if we didn't have the 1.9, we'd have to move more out of O&M. Over the capital project.
To go and step back, so apologies. So this little bit of history would have come out of fund balance. So that would be a part of your ramped plan. So not your, but the board approved a number of years ago a plan to slowly draw down from fund balance as we increase the annual budget expenditure until we get to the point where the $7.2 million comes exclusively out of the budget. So what ESSER is allowing us to do is to actually avoid the drawdown out of fund balance that we would have planned.
Okay. Thank you. That helps.
Any other questions or comments?
And one last curious question. In the education fund and the O&M fund, this is probably not super important, but the increase in the termination benefits this past year, is that, why?
Well, we're going to get a much better answer from the architect of the budget. That's Mrs. Kim Funkheiser. She's Kim, directly behind us, so she's our controller and treasurer. We had a significant population that retired, and there were benefits attached to those retirements. So our overall number, Kim, was more than 100 retirees. And then those specific benefits attached to those retirements are those termination benefits. So one-time cost.
Okay, so was it atypical for this year to have so many retirements?
I mean, it's a pretty significant percentage of the population that retired this year.
Any other questions or comments regarding the budget? Just wanted to say great job.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. O'Keefe. Okay, so I'd like to ask a motion in a second to post the tentative budget for fiscal year 2022 and set the public hearing for said budget on Wednesday, August 18th, 2021 at 7 p.m. at Hubble Middle School, 3 South 600 Herrick Road, Warrenville, Illinois 60555. Can I have a motion in a second?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Paulson. Second by Mr. Long. Mrs. Hutchinson, can you please call the roll?
Yes.
Mr. Long? Yes. Ms. Blanchard?
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Hammond?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, next on our action item is approval of the resolution authorizing transfer of monies from operations and maintenance fund to capital projects fund. Dr. Schuler?
Yeah, I don't think there's any additional information. This was really a part of the budget presentation as well, but this is the formal transfer to capital projects.
Are there any questions or comments from the board? Okay, I will ask for a motion in a second to approve the resolution authorizing the transfer of monies from the operations and maintenance fund to capital projects fund as presented. Moved by Mr. Hanlon.
Second.
Second by Mrs. Wheaton. Mrs. Hutchinson, will you please call the roll?
Yes.
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 Yes. Yes. Next up is approval to post high school, middle school, and elementary school handbooks for the 2021-2022 school year. Dr. Schuler?
Yep, Dr. Kyle's up at the podium. You might remember at your last board meeting, Dr. Kyle previewed what was to come in terms of changes to the handbooks. So rest assured he's not going to go through all of the handbooks because this was previewed for you, but he just wants to make a couple of comments on where all of these additions to the handbook come from so that it is explicitly clear where we arrive at opportunities that we add to the handbook. So Dr. Kyle?
Thanks, Dr. Schuler. I get the opportunity to update the handbooks annually, and when we look at changes to the handbook, there's really three things that we're looking at that we look to update annually. One is Board of Education policies. We had a lot of policy updates this year. Through press, we update our Board of Education policies. Lately, the past 2 years, there's been a lot of CDC and IDPH updates as well. And then I meet with administrators at all three levels about discipline situations that come up. Those are really the big three that are included in this document that's up on the screen right now that we use for changes for next year. It's an annual process. I do have to thank Board President Chris Crabtree. I brought a visual because she gave me about 85 different things to look at last year. She's very helpful, but I also use Illinois Principal Association's Model Student Handbook. So when board policy does get updated, I'm trying to really make it more readable. Try to make the three look similar and continually improve the readability of it. So that's where these changes come from. I had an opportunity a month ago to share. Where I'm asking the board tonight is the opportunity to post these, and then we would come back in August to actually approve.
Any questions or comments from board members on posting these handbooks?
So we're approving the postings for public review and comment, and then formal approval from the board in August, which, if I recall, this would have been too late in previous years. Are we this year not doing paper documents and just putting online?
We removed the policy changes. These pieces are actually online. So in August, if and when you approve, obviously there'll be communication out to families, but they're no longer in the handbooks like in years past. We used to have it ready by June to have printed and ready for students in August.
Any other questions or comments from board members? I'd like to say thank you, Dr. Kyle, and to Erica, too, because over the last few years, these have been something that, as you know, I have a passion of mine. I went through the high school one this time, reading it extremely carefully, and I think I only had 3 questions. So it's definitely a huge improvement, and I appreciate the readability also for families to be able to navigate through that as well. So thank you. Okay, so I need to ask for a motion in a second to approve posting of the high school, middle school, and elementary school handbooks for 2021-2022 as presented.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Hanlon. Seconded by Mr. Long. Mrs. Hutchinson, will you please call the roll?
Yes.
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 Yes. Yes. Okay. That's my spot here on the agenda. Let's move things around. Discussion items. Discussion of Vision 2022 update and board priorities for the 2021-2022 school year. Dr. Schiller.
So I guess my suggestion, if the board would be amenable to this, let me just set the context for these plans and encourage you to take some time before August to really review them and look at them, and we can reserve the discussion for August. I know it's getting late. We've had a full meeting tonight, so I'm just not sure this would be the optimal time to really dig into to these. But annually, the board has always set priorities. Really, those priorities can encompass the board goals for the year, the areas that we're going to work on, and those priorities are driven by your strategic plan, which is the Vision 2022 plan. After really a brief recess last year with kind of the altered year with COVID, what we have identified for you is our anticipated plan of work for the upcoming school year in each of our departments. So your Ed Services Department, Student Services Department, Administrative Services, Technology and Innovation, and Communications. And so I would just encourage you to spend some time really looking through those plans. Please feel free to send any questions about some of the work projects that we've prioritized in terms of student learning, student services, anything. And again, those questions can come back to August for a discussion, if that's okay. So happy to clarify anything, but I think that would make the most sense.
Can I ask just one quick question, just a clarifying thing? For the line or where the level of implementation is, I'm sorry, I just made, this might be a super dumb question, but where this says full implementation, like that's fully implemented now, or will be by the end of the year?
Fully implementing it this school year.
Perfect. Thanks.
Any other questions or comments?
I had just one question on the format of these. I've looked at this enough years, but if I was to look at any one of these pages and say, what are we going to focus on in the next school year, this coming school year, where do I look? Is it the specific goals?
Specific goals.
Okay. So the bullet point there would be proposed as a specific goal or work plan.
Specific area that we're focused on within that department.
Anything else? I appreciate the opportunity that we have to spend a little more time. And it's not that late, so I appreciate moving that discussion to August. Okay. Written reports attached to the agenda, the monthly financial reports, the FOIA report, board communication log, reports from board members, board committee reports. We have the July 7th Finance Committee report attached. Are there any comments or questions regarding that? Other reports from board members? Anything? Okay, topics for future discussion. The 2021-2022 budget public hearing. Next regular meeting is August 18th, 2020-21 at Hubble. There are no announcements. Do we have any public comments on non-agenda items?
Yes, Erica's heading back to grab the log. Give us just a second.
I was speaking kind of quickly. While she's bringing that to me, the same guidelines do apply as stated previously for public comments on the agenda item, so just a reminder. The first person is JP, and I don't want to butcher this name here. I'm going to let you say it yourself.
Okay, my name is John Paul Augustinovich. I'm a disabled veteran, and I'm a little dismayed by some of the stuff that happened during the event today. I mean, I agree with everyone here that you should show respect to everyone, including showing, well, probably the thing is in this little handbook thing I was given was, in all schools, citizenship values must be taught, including patriotism, democratic principles of freedom, justice, and equality, proper use and display of the American flag, the Pledge of Allegiance, and voting process. Unfortunately, I did notice and was told last meeting there was some disrespect during the Pledge of Allegiance. It does affect a lot of kids who have veterans as parents, as family members, active duty members. So when you see members who are just standing there during the pledge, not offering respect, it's the same as when you were talking about how people were heckling speakers up here. It's as if the board is heckling members of the public who do have respect for things like that. So I would like to just have some courtesy, follow what you have in your handbook, and you are setting an example for kids. That's what you said. You said, hey, there are kids here. So I have, and that's pretty much about it. So I was just a little upset that you're not truly setting examples as administrators for the students by showing how to properly respect the flag and to respect others in the community who do believe in certain things. As administrators, you don't bring your political agenda to meetings. You are here as public servants to serve everyone. So thank you very much. It's been a long night, so I'm just not going to keep going on it. So thank you.
Thank you. Amanda Spence.
Hello again. I'm Amanda Spence. I'm a resident of District 200. One thing I have observed over clearly the last year, and I know this has been brought up in a lot of discussions, is communication between the school districts, the schools, and the parents out in public. Obviously, it is definitely improved in the fact that we have things like Facebook and emails and websites. But I think clearly today showed that we were able to spread a message amongst parents to come together for their common beliefs, but had the slide that was shown shortly after those comments been available or mentioned or a post about where it was heading, we could have shortened this meeting by quite a bit. Just hearing that there would be possibly an option for masks would have caused multiple issues in this meeting to not happen. But I noticed that throughout the year that communication to the parents and the students, it's not always there. I can see the food drives, I can see kids out at recess and lunch and whatnot all on the Facebook page, but I can't find information about the policies, procedures, issues going on here in the meetings to know whether I should have someone make sure my kids are in bed so I can attend the meeting. It's been, I know it's gotten better, but I still feel like there's really a disconnect between the issues that are being dealt with by the school board and what the public is seeing is going on until something's implemented and put out there. And I know this is always going to be an ongoing issue, but it is definitely something I know can be worked on to make sure communication back and forth is not lost in the social media creativeness that goes on.
Thank you. Brian Kramer? Is it Kramer? Kracher?
He was the guy that said he signed up on the wrong.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Brian Howell?
Thanks for staying late. Had no idea we were going to have this evening tonight, but I appreciate you staying to hear my comments. I'm sharing comments from my daughter, actually, a 2014 graduate of Wheaton Warrenville High School, and she wrote this last year in the wake of the racial reckoning that we had in this country, and in light, inspired by a posting that you might remember from 2016 by Brian Crooks, who's an African American from Naperville. And so I'd like to just read this. I've edited it a lot. I've cut it down so that it'll fit the time. I can do the longer version if you're interested. She wrote on her own Facebook page, Crook's story is, it's important to mention, my daughter is biracial, and so her experience is reflecting on her time as a biracial student in the schools. Crook's story is a beautiful and raw testimony that at the time it was posted, exposed the ugly reality of ignorance-begotten racism in the burbs. I urge you to read it. I won't ever forget where I was and how I felt when I read Crooks' post. Naperville is a town adjacent to my hometown of Wheaton, Illinois. His words evoked a vivid clarity of some of my own memories growing up brown in Wheaton. For background, Wheaton is a beautiful, safe suburb with great schools and excellent resources and facilities. It's full of good people.
I was privileged to grow up there, and it shaped the person I am today, a person I happen to like. Wheaton is also very homogeneous, read very white. Between 2001 and 14, when I lived there, and it is still very homogeneous today. I was typically one of 2 or 3 kids of color in any classes throughout my school career, if not the only person of color. And I don't mean student of color, I mean person of color. My teachers were all white too. The first experience of my life I would categorize as racist was hostile in public. A white woman, a stranger, confronted me at a school event and loudly demanded to know, "Where are you from?" with a disgusted tone and a wrinkled nose. She reacted with an incredulous and derisive "really?" and stormed off after I answered, "I'm from America." My answer wasn't great, but it was the truth, and I was 12. Passers-by stared and said nothing. I was humiliated and confused. At the time, I thought maybe it was a bizarre, isolated event, just an unfortunate run-in with a shameless bigot who likes bullying children. But I discovered that children also like bullying children. Starting in middle school, I can say that every single day somebody made a racial comment to me, whether we were friends, friendish, or definitely not friends. I was called a mutt or foreign multiple times a week. I had full-blown arguments with people who took it upon themselves to convince me I was Mexican. And I wasn't great at hiding how much these comments bothered me, which, if you've ever been a human between the ages of 5 and 13, you know is fuel for further antagonism. I remember this one kid, adept at identifying the hurts of someone and exploiting them, called down the hallway, "Wow, Hannah, you look extra foreign today," when I wore my new tiny hoop earrings to school. It provoked laughter and stares, and I couldn't wear hoops again until college. In my 8th grade Spanish class, I was frequently looked at an accusatory tone as to why I didn't speak better Spanish, the implication being that I look like I speak Spanish, so it made no sense that I did not. Occasionally, though less accusatory, this even came from teachers. Poetic justice is I ultimately double majored in Spanish. In high school, racial ignorance was my volleyball team pulling into the parking lot of West Chicago High School and collectively shrieking how ghetto it was, an adjective that mysteriously only seemed to apply to the high schools that had a higher minority population. It was my black friend having her heart broken by a white boy who, in his own words, just didn't have jungle fever. It was walking down the hallway, fingers interlocked with my half-black, half-white boyfriend at the time, who had brown skin and dark hair, and being asked repeatedly if he was my brother. It was my English teacher telling me, when I criticized the U.S. colonization of the Philippines, that it was justified because Filipino people are just so cute. It was my entire English class getting up in arms about tribal communities who opposed the use of Native Americans as mascots for being too sensitive. In many ways, just look at Ohio's Chief Walker would be so happy, it's flattering. I would never try to say that my experience was as bad or worse than Brian Crooks's experience, or as bad as most black folks experience in a predominantly white space. My hope is just to share my collection of experiences. My hope is to illuminate what I dealt with as a brown kid at Wheaton as a result of people not knowing any better. And my message is, people need to know better. I regret not being brave enough to speak in middle school and high school. I bet a surprising number of people would have been open to learning. Like I said before, Wheaton is full of good people. So I share this with you just to encourage you in your work, encourage you in the discussions that you had February 24th that are vital and important ones, encourage you in setting measurable goals for the district, in hiring and in the training of teachers, and just to tell you that there's a lot of people supporting the work that you do. So thank you.
Thank you. That ends our public comment on non-agenda items. There being no further action to come before the board in open session, do I have a motion and a second to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Mr. Hanlon, second? Is that Ms. Bateman? Sure, second. Okay. I can do a voice vote here. So all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The meeting is adjourned.